Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the enthusiasm. Welcome, everyone, to the Bureau for Private Postsecondary Education Advisory Committee meeting. To begin, we'll do intros from this end over and establish a quorum.
Thomas Wong.
Natalie Lyons, Consumer Advocate.
Joseph Holt, Institutional Representative.
Margaret Ryder, Consumer Representative.
Kate Lee Carey, Institutional Representative.
Michael Marian, Bureau Chief. Doug Smith, Legal Counsel for the Bureau.
Robert Snowden, a former student representative.
Diana Maya, Public Member.
Richie, do we have a quorum? Quorum established, thank you. All right, so before we begin with the agenda, a couple things. First of all, for those of you who are not already aware, the Bureau is having an open house today from 12:30 to 2:30 at their new fancy digs next door. Everyone, we welcome you to come and see the new building and have a chance to shake hands with your friendly neighborhood Bureau staff, and we hope everyone can make it. And in that vein, we're going to try to power through the entire agenda if we can by 12:30 so that we don't have to come back afterwards. So with that in mind, we will get started. The first thing on the agenda will be a public comment on items that are not on the agenda. So if there's anything that anybody wants to raise today for future discussion or that is not already on the agenda, now would be your chance. All right, seeing none, we will move on. Next up is item 3, review and approval of the November Advisory Committee meeting minutes. Does anyone have any comments, notes, edits, concerns? We have a chance to take a look. Do you have any notes, Margaret? You're usually the one that finds the typos. Not today. I love it. All right, well, go ahead.
I'll move for approval.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. With that, I'll take a vote from the end down, our first motion and across.
Yes.
In favor?
In favor.
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
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 Wonderful. I love it when a plan comes together. Okay. Next up, item number 4, remarks by Representative the Dca. Welcome. The boss is here.
Well, good morning, advisory members and Chief Marian, and thank you for having me here today. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. As most of you know, my name is Kimberly Kirkmeyer, and I'm the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs. And thank you just for allowing me just to introduce myself, kind of give you a little bit about my background, and then provide you some updates from the department. And then I'll open it up to questions at the end. So it actually was really an honor to be appointed by Governor Newsom to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs. The department really has been my home. For those of you that don't know, I've actually been at the department for about 30 years. I started as a student assistant a long time ago at the Board of Cosmetology, and have worked my way up from that time. I actually went to the medical board mid-career and enjoyed that a lot, and then I got an appointment by Governor Schwarzenegger back to the Department of Consumer Affairs, actually as the Board and Bureau Liaison. And then after that, I actually went back to the medical board where I was appointed as the executive director, and I have been serving in that role 6 years before I got this appointment here. And so DCA has been my home. I love DCA. I know a lot about DCA, and so it's really an honor now to be able to serve in this capacity. I actually sent out an email to all of the department employees that really went over my initial focus as the director, and I kind of wanted to share those with the advisory committee, just so you know some areas that we're going to be focusing in on, where my direction will be over the next year. The first thing is client services and satisfaction. I believe that every position within the department actually plays a critical role in providing efficient and quality services to the boards and bureaus, so they can in turn provide the best experience to licensees and the public. And customer service is something I think is really important, and that's something I'm going to be striving for here, to provide that to the board so they can provide it on to their clients. And then working smarter together. I think we have a lot of talent in this department, and I think we have more creativity and collaboration between the boards and bureaus, kind of building a bridge between the department and the boards and bureaus. I think we can actually revamp the way we do business if we work together and find best practices and use the tools that we've been given. Data and transparency is something that's really important to me, so I want to use that data and technology to better inform the decisions that we're making. So action plans are developed to drive down licensing and enforcement timelines and provide measurable achievements. And I'm just going to stop on this one here a little bit, because for this advisory committee, I want you to know that there is a lot of work that goes into these statistics that are pulled for the packets that are in front of you. It's not easy for the staff in some of the avenues to pull the data because of the technology and the system that they have. I know you're going to hear a little bit of an update a little bit later from Dr. Marian about changing that system, and I think that change in that system is going to be drastic for this department, because it's going to be able to get a lot more information for the members from the data that it can be gathered with new technology. So with those things in mind, my main areas that I'll be looking at is really reducing the time frame for processing regulations. Right now, it takes a while to get those regulations through the process, and so that's something that we're going to be looking at streamlining. We also want to obtain Fiscal reports for the department. This is another thing that impacts this bureau because of the way that you collect increases or fees. It's actually something that's difficult if you don't have the reports to show you what you're expending and what your revenue is. It's difficult to make projections, and so that's something we're going to be working to get those reports in the hands of Dr. Marian and his staff, so he can actually know the finances of the bureau. Also decreasing the time to perform investigations at the Division of Investigation. This is something from when I was in my prior role at the medical board, something that's very important, because the longer those individuals are out there practicing, the longer there could be for consumer harm that happens. So we want to make sure that we're doing investigations as quickly as possible. Working on ADA compliance issues, making sure that all of the information that we provide on our website is ADA compliant. Want to make sure that we get that information out to those that need it. And then lastly is really ensuring that all of legislation is implemented by the boards and bureaus within the department. This is something very near and dear to my heart, because there's a lot of legislation I think that gets passed that I'm not sure is actually being fully implemented. And so we want to make sure from a top-down approach that our legislative unit is actually reaching out to the boards and bureaus to follow up and make sure that legislation that's passed is being implemented on a go-forward basis, but also on a look-back basis as well, and make sure that prior legislation is now in each of the boards and bureaus being done appropriately, like has been requested. So just a few updates from DCA, a regulation unit. You may be aware that DCA Legal Office has created a regulation unit to directly assist in the processing of department rulemaking proposals. In November, this unit actually finally became fully staffed, and all DCA programs have been assigned a regulations attorney who will act as an assigned reviewer of proposed rulemaking packages. And then a large priority of that unit right now has been focusing on AB 2138 regulations. And with that the assistance of that unit, actually, we've been proactively tracking the execution of all of those regulation packages. And so we want to make sure that we reach the compliance by the date that it is actually imposed. And then another step DCA is taking to improve transparency and efficiency in actually processing regulations is we're moving to a Sharewell system, which is a data system that will track regulation submissions in progress so that programs can monitor the status of their regulations after they've been submitted to the department. And then it'll be easier to share edits back and forth as well, because it's going to be all electronically based. With the Fiscal reports, I'm actually pleased to announce that I think we're really close to having those reports done. The Office of Information Services actually have been able to gather the information out of the Fiscal system and use a system that we currently are using to get information for our licensing and enforcement in a Cognos-based system called Qbert. And so these reports will be eventually able to where Dr. Marian will be able to go in no matter when and run them on an ad hoc basis to where he can see what his expenditures are. Sunset review. This is a year of sunset for the Bureau, and so while 2020 sunset hearings have not yet been scheduled, please know that the department remains committed to working with the Bureau to provide support in preparing for these hearings, and will continue to communicate as we receive more information. Dr. Marian and I have actually already met regarding the sunset review, and we'll also meet with those in the administration soon to continue to prepare for those hearings. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about our Organizational Improvement Office. And so this is a unit that actually provides DCA program change management services and business process mapping, and then finally information technology system requirement documentation. This unit provides collaborative consulting on process reengineering that maximizes utilization of existing resources, improves productivity, and increases quality. And we call it the OIO. This unit actually has two central focuses. It reviews DCA centralized services. So this unit is conducting legislatively mandated reviews of DCA services to identify opportunities to achieve efficiencies. They've already done the Legal Affairs Division, that regulatory process. They've also already done a study of that. That report has already been released. And they have also completed a study now of the Division of Investigation, and that report is going through its final review processes. The Office of Information Services Service Desk is the next study that they're doing, and it's actually very close to being completed, and that report will be released. And then finally, they've just begun a study on the Office of Human Resources to make sure that we look at how we hire individuals and can we make that process any more efficient and actually expeditious. Really, we want to expedite that process. The other part of that unit is they currently currently working with 9 boards and bureaus to document and analyze their processes. OIO has worked with the Bureau relative to the Business Modernization Project to document processes and gather functional requirements for their new IT system. And then they've also identified efficiencies during this process, because you don't want to go into a new IT system with old processes that actually are not efficient. And so that was part of their process, is to go through and analyze that and do that mapping. But again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And with that, I would like to open it up for any questions that you may have. And again, I just want to thank you all for your service on this committee and really in helping the Bureau make the decisions that it needs to make.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, thank you very much for being here. I very much appreciate your being here and being with us so you can see what's happening and get some insight from the committee meetings. A couple of questions. When you were mentioning about you want to get investigations done faster, is that referring just to the internal DCA Division of Investigations, or were you relating also to Bureau investigations?
So for right now, we're looking at the Division of investigations. I think something that a lot of the entities, and that's why I think that OIO unit, the Organizational Improvement Office, is so important, is that they can go out and look at business processes. And this is something that I would actually like them to come out and go through the Bureau's processes and identify areas where efficiencies can be found to streamline that. But for now, we're focusing specifically on the Division of Investigation.
I'm not that familiar with that division, and so does it ever get involved in bureaus and boards' investigations, or?
Yes. So basically what happens in most boards and bureaus under the department, the complaint starts out in the board or bureau. They work it up to a certain point, and then if it needs an investigation that goes to a sworn peace officer, their unit of sworn peace officers, then at that point that will go to that unit to be investigated. Dr. Marian can talk about specifically this bureau, but for most boards and bureaus, they all utilize this entity with the exception of a few that either have their own investigators or they may have their own inspectors that they send them to. And I know a lot of work comes out of your inspection unit where you do that, but you also have investigations that are performed there as well.
And this is, Margaret, this is one of when we did the restructure, a reorg of the Bureau, and I brought in some additional support. These were the individuals that came in to help us with some of the reorg, specifically in enforcement.
Right, so that was when you had the big bump in
Correct.
closures and so forth.
Absolutely correct.
And not right now, but at some point, maybe some additional information on how much access you have to them on an ongoing basis would be useful for us to
So
understand.
we have regular access to them if we need them.
Okay.
Obviously, it was a steep cost for us in regards to
I see.
getting some of the work
That's
done that
what-
we needed, but it was needed to be done, and I'm happy with the outcome.
Okay. And then my second question is, it's been my view or perspective in the past that bureaus and boards generally are not able to take positions on legislation, that the governor has held that fairly close. And I just wondered if you see any change under this governor, if the Bureau might be able to speak up more in the legislative process before it gets to the end, or if we're pretty much standard the way it's been in the past.
So it's different between boards and bureaus. So a board is a semi-autonomous entity because they have a board that governs them and that for the most part makes the decisions. And so they're a policy decision maker. So those entities right now can already take positions on boards. So it's bureaus are the ones that have to go through the administration. So what happens is there's a process and it will go through, and if it gets through the process and the governor agrees and the governor's office basically agrees with the recommendation usually that's going through or changes, if they meet that time frame where we can actually provide the position, then that will happen just like it does right now.
In my experience in the past is that position is not taken publicly, at least, until way at the end of the process. Is that still going to be the situation pretty much?
With this new administration, I haven't worked with, obviously it's new to me on this side as well, but I know that we have started to provide positions over there. I think it just depends on where they are on the process with all of the bills that they have to look at. I mean, we are always hoping that as it goes forward, we'll be able to give it as soon as possible. But in the interim time, a lot of times, depending on what the bill is, we can actually provide technical assistance to the author's office and information that we can give from our perspective, even though we don't have a set position on it.
Right, and the only problem with that is then we're sort of not in the loop as to what positions the Bureau is taking, so.
Yeah, it does take a while for the process.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Real quick, I just wanted to thank you for your time and also commend you for climbing through the organization over so many years. That's very inspiring, and glad that you'll be able to leverage your organizational experience and have such a relatively small learning curve and to be able to affect change. And I agree with your list of priorities. It seems like you're definitely focused on things that will make a real difference for consumers. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I have one question. Are there any other boards or bureaus that have a sunset review this year, or is the Bppe the only during 2020?
No, there's actually a list. I think there's probably about 10. I'm going to look about 12 that are going through the process right now.
All under DCA, there's 12?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. There's the other bureau is the Bureau for Real Estate Appraisers is the other bureau. So it's the two bureaus and all the rest of them are boards.
Understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, did you have something?
Oh, I was just going to clarify that it's Department of Real Estate, and then, so Department of Real Estate is its own entity, and then the program's under the Department of Consumer Affairs.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard nothing but great things about you, and welcome to your new position. And we look forward to seeing you at our future meetings, hopefully.
Absolutely.
And I just would like to add, it's been a pleasure working with the new director, and as Mr. Holt said, her history within DCA has been huge and a huge help for me. And it was funny, we actually had coffee the week before she was announced as the director. And I was talking to her about her longevity here and how to move a board and a bureau forward. And it's been a pleasure working with her thus far. So I think we're in good hands.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay. So before we move on to the Bureau update, is there any public comment relating to our new DCA chief's comments? No? All right. Excellent. So next up, Bureau operations update and discussion. I think the first one is probably you, Dr. Marian. update on advisory committee handbook revisions.
Actually, that's me.
Oh, is that Doug? All right.
We're in the process of revising the Bureau's Advisory Committee Handbook. Sorry, we're in the process of revising the BPE Advisory Committee Handbook. The goal is to make a more useful guide for the advisory committee members and to be able to use it as a reference for the committee's procedures, responsibilities, and recommendations that you ultimately provide to the Bureau. The point of this update is to let you know that the project is in the works, and more importantly, to let you know that we want your input because you're the most important people for this advisory committee handbook. And so we'd like you to send any suggestions or ideas that you have for what you'd like to see in the advisory committee handbook and how it would be helpful for you. Send those to Dr. Marian before the next meeting. Richie.
Send them to Richie.
Mike's like, don't send them to me because I'm going to send them to Richie.
Yes.
All right. Any public comment on the handbook revisions? All right. Moving on to item B, update on Bureau staffing levels, BPPE org chart.
Yes, so within your packet, good morning, everybody. Within your packet, there's one document that's a org chart, and then you'll see the layout of the Bureau as far as the staffing and staffing levels. I know this was a conversation that we had, Mr. Holt and Ms. Lyons had some conversations about, and so I wanted to make sure that we provided that in today's packet so everybody can see kind of our staffing levels and the makeup of the structure of the Bureau. I think it's important for people to see that. I do want to just make sure there's one note. Everybody knows that we brought in a task force last year in regards to the enforcement side. This is on the back page. And within that unit, you see the 4 vacancies at the bottom. Right now, we actually have limited term positions. And I know Margaret and I think Sarah had made mention about certain classifications and staff being able to handle work at a certain level. And so right now what we have is limited term special investigators, and that was advised from the task force to give us that input in regards to bringing in staffing at that level that may be able to help with us with more complicated cases. They've been doing a great job in that role, and I'm definitely ecstatic to make sure to report that, and I know there will be more input brought around that. But so this is the current structure of the Bureau. You see some of the vacancies in red at this point in time. The majority of those, or a lot of those positions are either in the process of being posted or already posted. And that's the current staffing level. In addition to that, I also want to let you know it's an additional document that I put in the packet as well, placed in front of you, which is a placemat that gives you a breakdown and a look of BPP at a glance. I think this is helpful for people to kind of get a better understanding, and this is specifically for Robert Johnson, who's in the crowd, and who's been asking for information on data and research, and this is something that I think helps paint a larger picture for folks to understand the Bureau, and I want to give kudos to our team at BPPE and OIS in regards to helping us, or not OIS, but Public Affairs, to help us produce this document, which I think is going to be important for people to get a better understand of who we are as a Bureau. And that concludes my update for that.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I assume under the Special Enforcement Unit, those are the special investigators you're talking about?
Correct.
Are all of them limited term?
All of them are limited term at this time, yes.
Is that, maybe you already explained this before.
No,
sorry
no problem.
if I'm asking you to repeat something.
Nope.
Do we know what the term is, or it's just pending something?
So it's pending right now. The goal is sort of a pilot right now to see if this is the right classification for the work that we have them doing and the work that we need done. And so in hopes is that the job that they're doing a wonderful job right now. So it's likely we will eventually convert those positions, but right now they're just limited term positions.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Is that something that you would be seeking in the budget for this year? To convert those to regular positions?
Hi, this is Lisa Refretti. I'm going to jump in on that.
Hi, Lisa.
Right now, we brought in the limited terms instead of backfilling at the associate governmental program analyst level. So we're not asking for additional positions. We're just doing a pilot project and a new classification. And with the possibility of those becoming permanent, then we would not backfill the other vacant positions and just make those permanent positions.
Okay, so if is there a request already in to make those permanent positions or not yet?
Not yet.
And do you expect that you would make that determination, how soon would that be? Sometime in this fiscal year or not before next fiscal?
So at this point in time, I want to make sure we're doing the right thing, so I'm not going to rush it.
Right.
Just to make sure that the work they're doing at the level we need them to do is the correct position. So I would say probably in the next year or so.
And currently, what do they understand is the length of their limited term?
It's a 2-year limited term with the possibility of becoming permanent.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you for the org chart. It's very helpful. I have a couple follow-up questions. First, has the Office of Student Assistance and Relief, is that at maturity, or is it still in a multi-year implementation plan? Or is this the end state or the desired state for OSAR?
I don't think I'm sure I understand the question.
So OSAR has been 2 or 3 years now since they've been ramped up. Is this the planned final org chart for OSAR, or are there positions still planned for the future that aren't represented here?
So I know that there's definitely going to be more conversation around the staffing levels of OSAR. Because once again, the level of work that we're doing within that area is definitely going to be something we have to keep an eye on because they're doing a phenomenal job. And Scott will talk a little bit more about some of the outreach and stuff that they've been doing. But in a part of doing that, it's also going to raise the level of work that we need to do, just because everybody is starting to know more about the organization and what it does for students. And so that automatically the workload is going to increase and has been increasing. So those are conversations I will have to have ongoing, to be quite honest.
And then my last question is, during your tenure, Dr. Marian, have you been able to implement like load balance between the sections of the department, given the history of a backlog and having problem? To what degree have you been able to implement flexibility so areas that are on pace maybe can slide over and be cross-trained to help others? So
great question. And as a lot of you know, what we did in regards to right before we did the restructuring or reorg of Bppe, we actually had to have some of the folks that we brought in with the task force were actually also staffing that we brought out of licensing to help in enforcement. And so I think it's always going to be an ongoing question what the perfect staffing level is, because it also depends on the level of schools being open and closed. I think sometimes, Austin, people also forget, even when institutions of higher education close, there's still additional workload that comes on with that, even though that school may not be in existence. And so I said, this is something that I think has to be an ongoing monitoring thing. I wouldn't say we're at the perfect level now, but it's something that I'm paying something close attention to.
Thank you.
I had one more question just for clarification. The people that you have where you have vacant positions and then you have names in parentheses, does that mean that's who was there or who you're? Okay.
Correct.
All right, any other questions on the org chart from the committee? Seeing none. Any public comment or questions? All right, great. Moving on to item C, update on the Bureau's 2020 strategic plan presented by Solid. You must be solid. Welcome.
Welcome. Hi, I have a presentation. Oh, here comes the screen.
Oh.
Fancy.
Exciting.
Yes. So good morning. While this is ramping up, I'll introduce myself. My name is Suzanne Mays. I'm a business analyst and facilitator with the Solid Planning and Training Unit here at the Department of Consumer Affairs. In addition to facilitating the strategic planning process, Solid also offers training in a variety of areas, and we create custom learning and development opportunities for all of DCA. We're currently working with the Bureau to update your strategic plan, and Dr. Marian invited me to come in today and provide an overview of what that process might look like. So our strategic planning process aims to answer 3 key questions. The first is, where are we now? This entails taking a deep dive and really understanding the current reality in which the Bureau is operating. We look to the mission statement that outlines who the Bureau is, what you want to do, who you are serving. And SOLID conducts a comprehensive environmental analysis where we gather and analyze data to paint a very comprehensive picture of the environment in which the Bureau is operating. Our next question, we take a pivot, we look toward the future, where are we going? This is informed by the Bureau's vision statement, which is the conditions they hope to achieve if they're delivering on their mission and mandate. And SOLID strategic plan provides a roadmap and helps to push the Bureau in the direction toward creating that desired future state you are striving for. The final question is, how will we get there? This is where we get very tactical. This involves the goals and objectives in the Bureau's strategic plan. The goal areas are typically tied to key operations within the Bureau and might include things like communication and outreach and organizational effectiveness. We also offer action planning services where we can get very tactical and answer the questions of who's going to do the work, when is it going to happen, and what success metrics are we going to use to know we are successful. Our strategic planning process follows a roadmap. Looks like I'm missing a slide. Oops. All right, I will skip ahead. Our strategic planning process typically follows a roadmap. We've already completed our first phase, which is an introductory meeting with leadership from the Bureau to set the project schedule and determine which data collection methods would work best for this project. We are trying to align the strategic planning process with the upcoming sunset review so that information and data from both of these things can inform one another. So based on that, our strategic planning session is currently scheduled to occur, I believe, in late April. Can be adjusted if need be. Right now, we are in the process of conducting our environmental scan or analysis, and this is where SOLID really gathers a lot of data to identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in the Bureau's operating landscape. We summarize our findings, provide a report that can guide the strategic planning process. For the Bureau, the data collection methods we're using, we have a survey that is distributed to Bureau staff, external stakeholders, advisory committee members, and we conducted one-on-one interviews with the Bureau chief and the assistant chief. Once the environmental scan is complete, we move on to the next phase, which is a strategic planning session. So SOLID will work with representatives from the Bureau. We facilitate a meeting where we discuss findings in the environmental scan and develop goals and objectives for the Bureau's upcoming strategic plan. Typically, a strategic plan would cover a 3 to 5 year period. So the goal areas, as I mentioned, are tied to the Bureau's key operations, and the objectives outline specific tasks or areas where the Bureau would be focusing during their strategic plan. After the session, we take all of the input we gathered. SOLID will draft a strategic plan document, submit it to the Bureau for additional comments or revisions, and then we will provide a final copy for the Bureau to approve. The final step in our strategic planning process is an optional but highly recommended action planning session, and this is where your strategic plan really comes to life. We look at the goals and objectives in the plan, and then we develop an action plan that includes information about responsible parties, so who is going to do the work, timeframes, when is it going to happen, and success metrics. We always want to loop back and make sure we're using data. How are you going to know it's working? So the action plan ends up being a really useful tool for our clients to help them assess whether they are on track to achieve what they're setting out to accomplish during their strategic planning period. It also helps them make sure they're using their resources efficiently and effectively, and sets them up to be successful in achieving the goals they outline in their plan. We wanted to give you a peek behind the curtain about the methodology we use to gather and organize our data. We use a SWOT framework. So we look both internally and externally. The S and the W refer to strengths and weaknesses, which are things inside the Bureau or places where the Bureau can reasonably expect to influence or control outcomes. And the opportunities and threats, the OT piece of it, we also look outside of the Bureau and try to get a sense of what is happening in the broader landscape. To ensure the Bureau is aware of things that they may not be able to directly control necessarily, but it would be helpful to be aware of because they have the potential to be either helpful or harmful as the Bureau is delivering on its mission and mandate. During our strategic planning process, we strive to capitalize on strengths and opportunities and find ways to mitigate the strengths and the threats. And we have found with our clients, looking at it in this comprehensive way helps them to leverage resources, be the best they can be internally, but also be nimble and responsive and aware of things that are happening in that external environment as they are delivering on their strategic plan. That concludes my overview. Thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate the time, and I wanted to open it up if you had any questions about the strategic planning process.
I have a question. Sorry. I've done a number of these strategic plans with different employers, and I think the value of the information you get can rely on it being anonymous and honest. Are the surveys that are being conducted, are they anonymous surveys, or are people required to include their names? Okay.
No, the surveys we're using, and one of the reasons why we offer that as a data gathering tool, people are able to respond anonymously. They have some pre-selected options. They also have an opportunity to expand in a text box, so we can get a very broad set of perspectives.
How often is the Bureau supposed to do a strategic plan?
I think it is flexible. I know it's a requirement for the DCA entities to have a strategic plan. Typically, the planning time frame is 3 to 5 years, and it depends on where the Bureau is in terms of accomplishing objectives, or if there are things, sometimes they might compress a time frame if you know you need to be very responsive to something, or extend it if you're in a building or pivoting phase. So there is some flexibility with how long of a time frame the plan addresses.
And so the current plan ends in 2020, and so that's why we're pressing to get this one done. And obviously, as Suzanne said, it's tied into what comes out of our sunset as well, strategically.
One thing I would note is that the last time there was a strategic plan and I reviewed the final product, I haven't looked at it for a while, but my recollection is that it was so broad and so general that one couldn't tell if the goals had been met, because there was, having been a teacher at some point in my career, your objectives have to be measurable. And it was so broad, so general that one really couldn't tell what was happening. So has there been a change in the strategic planning efforts so that there will be something more measurable? And I particularly want to mention this because if there's an overarching problem that we've had since the Bureau was established, and even before the Bureau was established, it's that we have too many schools committing fraud, basically, or not providing the education they're supposed to. And often this has been uncovered or dealt with by somebody other than the Bureau. And it's my view that the Bureau should be, Johnny on the spot, the first ones to figure things out. And maybe my view is wrong. Maybe they're, we don't necessarily see the whole picture, so maybe they have been doing more than I recognize. But is there something being done so that in this effort, in strategic planning, there will be high focus on that as one of the major issues to be dealt with, and that the recommendations or goals are so specific that we'll be able to measure, what has changed?
Thank you for your question. There are 2 aspects of our process that we are refining. Solid is a continuous improvement unit, so we're always looking to how we can do a better job of serving our clients. One is during the strategic planning process, we strongly encourage our clients to focus on 3, no more than 5 key objectives for each goal area. That results in a reasonable amount of things to do during the strategic planning period, and it also, I think, helps with specificity because you don't have so many things that they lose meaning. The second piece of our process that we are, I think, marketing more assertively is the action planning. That currently is an optional piece of the strategic planning process, but it is really where those tactical accountability measures, timeframes, responsible parties, and metrics are tied to the objectives in the strategic plan. Dr. Marian is very interested in doing action planning with us, so we are excited in this next planning process to hopefully get into having something that is useful, helpful, and measurable for the Bureau.
Bppe spends a lot of time working with Solid because to your point, my interest is to make sure that everything that we're doing has some level of measurability to it. If that is that a word, measurability? It is now. It is now. Okay, and so that'll allow us to be able to measure what we're doing and how we're doing it. So I'm definitely taking a maybe a little bit of a different approach than the prior one.
At the same time I say that, it's like, I also don't want measurements to be such that they measure how many of this you did and how many of that, rather than, the quality of what you did, because sometimes people can get too focused on, how many did we close, how many did we, so it's a measurement of the quality, how many schools did we deal with that were problems and prevent from becoming big problems, that kind of thing.
I have a question for Dr. Marian. Would we be able to, at a future meeting this year, perhaps review the current strategic plan and how how the Bureau has?
Sure. So we'll make sure to get the current one out to you all. Not a problem. That's easy.
And then because the plan ends this year, will there be an opportunity to examine how we've achieved some of those strategic objectives over the timeline of the existing plan? I don't know how long it was for, but.
Yes. So what I will do is I will look into the best way that provide that information to you all. I think, yes, we can find a way to do it.
Thank you for including this on the agenda. I think it's very important for us to be involved in.
One last question, and that is so in the mapping phase that you showed the multiple steps, is the goal to try to get through, and assuming that Dr. Marian is going to take you up on the action planning piece of this puzzle, that we would try to get that done before the end of 2020? Yes. Absolutely. Okay. Great.
I think we sketched out a project plan where the strategic planning and sunset review would happen around the same time, and we would use the action planning session after the sunset review to make sure any key findings that came out of that process were included in the tactical plan for moving forward.
It makes a lot of sense since you're doing all that work already, not to have to duplicate all of it. Well, this was great. Thank you very much. Any other questions?
I would like to thank you for your work on this and ask sort of a question/request would be if there's any way to engage the advisory board members in the strategic planning process rather than seeing something at the end that maybe we might opine on one way or the other. If we had some voice during the development would be helpful.
So everybody should have received multiple emails from my office in regards to surveys.
Yes, the surveys. Yes.
So definitely want your input, please. Absolutely want you all to engage in the process.
Okay, great.
Especially since I think that we as a committee can be part of what we're doing as a committee should also be a part of the assessment. So we want to make sure that you're getting what you need from us. So, all right, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for your time.
All right. Any public comment on the strategic plan before we move on? Come on up or come on down. The price is right.
I also just wanted to echo the thanks. I'm really excited about having this on the agenda today. And I should have done this first. I'm Angela Perry with the Institute for College Access and Success, and just wanted to echo the thanks to Solid and to the Bureau for having the strategic planning update. It sounds like a really promising program. I echo the sentiments of Ms. Ryder that it would be great to have measurable accomplishments and to recognize the accomplishments that happen. So really excited about that. I also am excited to hear that the members of the advisory committee will be part of that stakeholder survey, and wanted to offer to if there are ways that the advocacy community can also be part of that. Also want to emphasize that student involvement obviously hugely important in that. And so if there are ways that we can help facilitate any of that, would be more than happy to do so.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Moving on to Margaret's favorite topic, an update on the IT system project. We love that their IT system still says BPPVE on it.
Is it really your favorite? Good morning, everybody. I'm Robert Bales, Education Administrator, and I'm also the project owner of the IT project for the Bureau. And with me, I have Sean O'Connor. He's the Chief of Project Delivery and Administrative Services for OIS. And he is also the individual spearheading our project. As you know, it's a project, IT project that involves more than just our Bureau. So I've invited Sean to come back and kind of talk to us about where we're at with the project and where we're going, our vision, and all that kind of stuff. Very excited about today's update because we are making some great progress and very excited about where we're going. But I'm not going to steal Sean's thunder. So, Sean.
Thank you, Robert.
Oh, you turned it off.
We would have logged that as a bug against the IT system. Thanks, Robert. Again, my name is Sean O'Connor. I work with the Department of Consumer Affairs in the Office of Information Services, but really work in partnership with your bureau as well as the other bureaus that are pursuing a new IT system. And as Robert had mentioned, and as you may recall, I came and spoke several months back to your bureau, and at that point, we were still in the procurement phase of finalizing our large system integrator contract to bring in folks who have expertise in implementing an IT system to meet the Bureau's needs. And I'm happy to report that we completed those activities and actually formally started our project on January 10th of this year. Those activities were completed. Robert was a key individual in through that and providing expertise on what the Bureau's needs are and in working with us on completing that procurement. So it's very exciting that we've started the project. The system integrator and product that we have on board is a product called Inlumon. They are a company that has implemented licensing and regulatory systems in multiple other states, and they have some expertise as well in the education space. I believe they've worked in Nevada's Department of Education and some of their regulatory needs and have implemented their system there. So as I mentioned, we just started on January 10th. So we have been working feverishly to get the system stood up. We are looking at implementing functionality during the summer that will allow folks to apply online and submit consumer complaints online. And the approach that we're taking with this project, and I mentioned this previously to this advisory committee, is we're, instead of going and doing things as past state IT projects have done, going with a big bang approach. We are using what is called an Agile development methodology, where we essentially break down the overall software implementation into achievable chunks and scopes so that we can get chunks of functionality to production. Like we can implement an online consumer complaint form, we can implement an online application form, and then focus on the other areas of business needs after that, like mobile inspections, enforcement workflow, those types of things. This is a approach that has been used successfully in many other public and private software development projects, and it's actually a methodology that the department itself has used recently. So we use this software development methodology in the successful implementation of the cannabis IT licensing and enforcement system. So it's something that I personally am very comfortable with, and I much prefer it to what we call the big bang approach, where you migrate completely off of a system all in one fell swoop after like 3 years of effort. With this approach, several of the benefits that you get are that you don't have to engage in as much organizational change management because you are incrementally rolling out the system through the different business areas of your organization. And then you also get to build momentum with your end users, whether they be external or internal, because they can actually see the change quicker. Instead of starting a project and then actually having changes on the screen come 3 years later, you're able to see them within months. As I mentioned earlier, we are targeting this summer to implement functionality that's primarily focused on the external, improving the external facing services that the Bureau, as well as the other 3 programs that are in the cohort, are offering currently to the constituents. So Recent project accomplishments, we had what I've heard feedback on is a very successful kickoff with the leadership to really highlight at a very high level some of the functionality that the system can achieve. Obviously, I mentioned specifically online applications, online consumer complaint forms. This system also has the ability to scale to a mobile device, whether that be an iPhone or an iPad, which we think offers opportunity not just for folks to utilize that to apply or submit applications online, but also in the business case of conducting inspections and being able to do that directly on an electronic device to achieve some efficiency there. So we're very excited in working with the Bureau to implement that functionality and introduce improvements into the services and efficiencies that you all do on a daily basis. We've got, I just wanted to close with, we've got a lot of work ahead to implement this system. Thus far, the engagement of the Bureau has been phenomenal. So since we've entered into what I'll call the project phase in early January, Robert, he has the pleasure of talking with me every single day as we have daily stand-ups on the progress that we're doing on the project. He's all logged into our software defect and enhancement tracking system and is all hooked up on our project management software, Microsoft Teams. So he's probably getting more exposure to these types of software tools than he ever thought he would in his state career, but he's doing so expertly already. And we've already had meetings with Bureau staff to gather some details on the functionality that we are implementing by the summer, and just looking really forward to continued engagement with Robert as we can move forward through the summer towards training, final testing, and completing out our development. So just want to thank Robert for his support, as well as Dr. Marian and Lisa. And at this point, I'll pause and happy to answer any questions you may have.
What was the name of the company again? Is it just Luma?
Inlumon. INLUM like Mary, ON.
ON. Thank you.
Sure. I have a couple questions. Sure. So one of the core problems with the current IT system, as has been reported to us in previous meetings, have to do with the database structure itself. That is the number of buckets in which information can be stored, the type and kind of information. So for example, a complaint category. Miscellaneous accounts for, let's say, this is hyperbole, but 40% is everything else, right? And they didn't have the ability to articulate at a more granular level types of complaints. And those are fundamental database structural issues, right? And so I'm curious to hear from you how you can marry the Agile process in which you look at piecemeal launching of productivity, which is very good, fixing things as you go, with the inherent problems with the database structure in the current system that was limiting specific information. So specific to that type of problem that you're describing about not being able to add, additional values or additional fields to capture information in a very efficient manner or nimble manner, I think that's partly a byproduct just of the age of the technology that the Bureau is currently utilizing. The Inlumon system that we have selected, as is characteristic of many of the software products we saw in market research, is able to add a new field, add new values to that field, format that field very quickly. I mean, I think that through the demonstration, we saw that there was full application workflows that we had already built out just based on looking at an application itself and a hard copy application and saying like, well, that looks like a drop-down value that has these three values in it. This looks like a yes/no question that we'll handle with a radio button. This looks like a checkbox type of thing. So I can attest, and I'm sure Robert would agree, that the functionality that we've seen in the system so far and the ability for the system integrator to configure that to meet the specific needs gives us a lot of confidence that that is likely not going to be a problem for us moving forward. I would be extremely, extremely surprised if that were the issue. I think the challenge before us in working with your organization is to make sure that with all of the opportunities to collect information, that we do so and engineer it in a manner that reaps the most benefits for us. Because I've seen implementations before where folks get told, we can track data on everything. and then all of a sudden you're tracking data on everything, and it's useless because you're not doing so in an organized manner. So those are the types of things that we're going to, lessons learned, we're going to bring to the table in working with your organization and working with Robert to make sure we implement something that provides maximum benefit to you. And I just want to mention that, I do not foresee a scenario in which 40% of the categories of complaints are identified as miscellaneous. The ability to add a value to a drop-down field is something that is very easily done in this system as well as other systems now. And
And you have on your roadmap data migration from the current database systems for historical analysis, for example?
Exactly. So with the Bureau of Private Postsecondary Education, the scope of the project to implement the new system is to completely migrate off of the existing database system before the end of the project. So we'll be working with Robert and other experts at the Bureau to identify which data we need to bring over, where that needs to be stored in the new system, and whether that needs to be transformed at all before it is brought over into the new system. And part of any exercise in data conversion, which I like to go on the record with is my least favorite part of any project, but you can't get away from it, is determining how far back we want to go and how detailed we want to get in going that far back. So some decisions that I've seen made on previous projects are that we'll go back and pull all the detailed information in for the past 3 years or 5 years. A lot of times it's tied to some form of regulation or statute that inspires the time frame that we need to pull the more detailed information on. And then the stuff that's older than that, we will dump off into a database so that we can read it and look at it if we need to. But the frequency at which staff needs to look at that data might not merit the amount of detailed analysis that we need to put into items that we are bringing over. So those are all types of questions that we'll work with the Bureau in getting answered as we progress through the project. And we'll get memorialized in one of our key artifacts in the project, which is the data conversion plan.
One last question. You artfully stated at the end of the project. Can you attach a date to that?
Sure. So this project phase will end after 18 months. So we started in January, so plus 18 months from that. And then we have 1 year of maintenance and operations services that we have the vendor on board for because...
So that migration will happen 18 months from now, and then you'll have another year of service post. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yep.
A couple of things. One is that when you are looking into a school, investigating a school, its history going back quite a ways can be very important. Its original application and complaints that have happened over the years, because sometimes these problems you realize have been going on for a very long time. So I hope that in looking at what you migrate in from the old data pays a lot of attention to making sure that you've got that information about past complaints, about past lawsuits, settlements, and so on, so that that's easily accessible to investigators. So I'd hope that would be one thing. The other thing is I see that in Lumen, or I guess, in Lumen is based in Nevada and seems to have a number of contracts with Nevada state agencies. Does it have, has it done this kind of thing for other states besides Nevada, especially related to education?
I believe they had worked with some regulatory agencies in Louisiana as well. And I want to say Tennessee, maybe. There's a couple other state-level entities that they've done. I believe they've also done one specific to education, which I could follow up on and get back to you with what specific regulatory agency related to education they've worked with.
I guess at this point, since you've already chosen them, this doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but just Nevada is really not noted for having a strong enforcement over its for-profit schools, nor I would imagine would Tennessee be, or some of the other ones you mentioned, Louisiana. So I just hope that they are able to really do it when we're talking about more serious regulation than some of these places have.
I would draw a difference between the technology utilized to implement the policy versus the policy or regulatory drive that is behind that. So I think that from what we have seen in the procurement and in comparing this against the multiple bidders that we got for this, that we saw that their product was the one that offered the most quality and the most the clearest documentation of past success, combined with the fact that they had a very competitive pricing that they came in with. So all of those items together made really them the ideal candidate for this.
How long have they been in business?
I would have to check, but I believe that most of the requirements around them having they would have had to have completed a project of, I forget the monetary value, but comparable to our scope at some point in the last 3 years, I believe. As well as all of the key staff that they are bringing on board to implement this project will have had to have had experience in the regulatory space and conducting roles comparable to what they're going to be doing for us within the last 3 or 5 years as well. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned that they are based out of Nevada, which is true. However, they are, we utilize the CMAS, which is a procurement vehicle through the Department of General Services here, that many companies utilize. It kind of pre-screens folks and provides a rate that has been deemed competitive by the Department of General Services. And so that is the procurement method we went through to get their services.
I have a question. Following up on the data collection and reporting piece that you love, what degree of flexibility will there be for individual staff within Bppe to have input on, say you develop like a standard report that you can just pull? I assume that's going to be an option. Or so for something like that, what degree do staff have input on what should be in a report? And then secondarily, will there be mid-level people that can create reports that aren't necessarily already generated? Or, I mean, basically I'm trying to get at the point that you don't always know what data you're going to need or what reports you're going to need to produce. And staff generally have a good sense of what that is, and even if it wasn't thought of in this process, something may come up later where it can be difficult for the IT person who is, all agent, a bunch of different bureaus are trying to get that person to help them develop a report. It can slow up efficiency and producing data. So just if you could speak to that.
So I kind of want to answer two components of that. So your first part regarding input from bureau experts, regardless of whether the topic is reporting, enforcement, business processing, application, licensing. What we've established is that, as Robert had mentioned, he is the product owner for your organization, and he is empowered to bring in the subject matter experts that he deems are best fit for whatever the topic at hand is going to be. We ensure that level of feedback occurs throughout the development process through that mechanism, and that's a key strategy for us to make sure the system we deliver is of maximum value. Now, in regards to reports, within the scope of this project, we have identified that the system needs to be able to be accessed via our Cognos reporting tool. Director Kirkmeyer mentioned earlier that is being used for Fiscal. That is a business intelligence reporting tool that department has a lot of expertise in maintaining and supporting, and has been linked up with many of our other enterprise licensing and enforcement systems. And that system itself has the ad hoc reporting capability to which you just described. So their staff are able to go in and run their own reports. So the ability to do that will be there upon the completion of the project. And that's something that we saw as important, thus we included that within the scope.
Sean, I just have a quick question, and thanks for your overview, and Robert for your work on this. I don't know if I missed you explaining how this will interface with other systems at the department, if at all, or if it's a standalone just for the Bureau outside of other systems. Obviously, SAIL is a standalone right now, so it wouldn't be surprising, but I think from a broader goal standpoint to have interoperability for some of these systems and data sets that can communicate and provide information across programs. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, certainly. So you're correct in identifying that SAIL is a standalone database system. But however, while the that is the case, we have part of the requirements for this was for the system to be able to interact with other systems in real time or in batch via technology called web services and APIs, which are common out there, and they're programming languages that allow systems to communicate to one another. So we've actually invested a lot of effort in developing here at DCA that layer of services that can be wrapped around this particular product and any DCA enterprise licensing and software solution. So the vision is absolutely that it will be able to interact with other systems. Within the original project scope, we did limit that to things that we know of at this time, but the potential to do that with other systems is there. And to give you an example, like we have built in to interface with our internal accounting system so that the accounting information of schools that are received and the fees flow through into Fiscal. But there is the opportunity there for this system to interact with other systems, whatever they may be, as the use case presents itself. And those types of things, those forward-looking things, are one of the reasons why we have that 12-month maintenance and operations contract or period within this initial contract after the project phase. And that phase will also include knowledge transfer, so that the vendor is giving the system administration training to our staff internally so that we don't need the system integrator around forever. The goal of this is that this is something that DC will maintain moving forward, much like the roadmap that we've done with other systems that we've implemented in the past.
Thanks. And then you mentioned incremental approaches. So can you talk about how that interfaces with any organizational change management efforts? Do you see that as eliminating the need for some of those efforts if you're going down incremental approaches and folks will be onboarded over time versus some of the proactive needs that might need to be undertaken to make sure that folks understand some of the difference in the work that they're going to be doing?
I think it doesn't eliminate the need. I think it decreases the risk and decreases the scope of the organizational change management by going in an incremental manner. So to give you an example, if we focus on applications or specific applications in each product release, then we can focus the organizational change management efforts to those people who will directly be impacted, whether they be external or internal folks, and focus our training efforts there. The Organizational Improvement Office within DCA, to which Director Kirkmeyer mentioned earlier, they worked with Bppe in the initial process mapping of all of their current processes, as well as their 2B processes, and they are engaged with the project team as well on a daily basis, because they will be the ones who are synthesizing what these system changes are going to be and working with the system integrator to develop training artifacts so that as we are migrating out new functionality, we are going down and preparing staff to be successfully take over the system once we launch it.
Great. And then in terms of a funding question and from a funding standpoint, I mean, obviously the Bureau has, invested resources towards other systems over a course of a long period of time, and some of those amounts have ratcheted up. Is there any reimbursement to the Bureau, or is there any transfer of, monies paid for other systems that the Bureau is not going to be receiving in order to fund this new and robust option?
I believe that I'd have to defer to the budget office on some of that, but I think that the best one artifact that I don't have in front of me that might lay that picture of that out is the financial activity worksheets that are part of the standard CDT project approval lifecycle. Our stage 4 financial activity worksheets should outlay what our system costs are going to be, and then what going into the future those costs will be for the Bureau.
What's the dollar amount of the initial contract, and then is there a dollar amount already figured out for sort of ongoing over per year over a number of years?
I don't know the dollar amount off the top of my head. I think that the market research that we established for the system integrator was around $5 million, and I know that it came in a little under that. So.
And that's for the initial setup, right?
That is for the 30-month contract, which is 18 months plus 12 months of maintenance and operations.
Thank you.
Sure. And that contract is shared between 4 programs. I just wanted to mention that. That is not completely paid for by the Bureau.
So having gone through one of these conversions in my lifetime, and thankfully only one, and hopefully will only ever be that one. I want to say thank you to both of you and Robert, especially because I know you have a day job, for how much work I know this is. And so thank you. It's a very great and very helpful presentation. So thank you both very much. Thanks. All right. Any public comment on the IT system before we move on to Robert's day job? All right, so next up, annual reports report.
Thank you very much. So I'm looking at the chart, which is attachment 5E on page 35. It's just kind of a snapshot of the 2018 annual report. So we had a total of 875 schools that were identified as having to submit an annual report, a 2018 annual report. We had 654 schools that submitted on time, which is by December 1st of last year. We had 74 late submissions, and as of February 1st, we had 147 schools that have not submitted yet. So our on-time submission rate was 75%. Submission rate as of February 1st was 83%. And we're continuing to work with the schools that did not submit for whatever reason. We have a small group of schools that have been non-responsive, and those schools will be receiving a citation for failing to submit their report.
Fine or abatement or something related to if they just don't submit at all when you issued the citation?
So the abatement is typically to submit the report.
Right.
And sometimes when we communicate with a school and they're non-responsive, we just can't get a hold of them. But when they receive a citation, it's usually a different thing. The response is different. They
Suddenly
call
they
us
respond?
up. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How does the on-time submission rate for this year or the year that you're reporting out compare to previous years?
Well, last year, it's apples and oranges, really, because if you recall, last year was our first year using this new portal, and everything was new, and the amount of outreach that we did was quite intensive because it was a new program, new process, new portal, basically. And the dates had changed because the portal wasn't ready when it was supposed to be ready. So last year, I think, was kind of an anomaly. But I think we were at about 84% on-time submission last year. But again, we really coached the schools and worked with them more extensively than we did this year. Our focus this year was on reviewing last year's data because we had a smaller window to review that data because the submissions were so late. So we probably didn't reach out as far as outreach to the level that we did last year, this particular year, which would explain the lower submission rate this year.
What happens if you issue a citation and then they still don't? Is there a next step? They still don't submit it?
There is a next step, and I can probably let the discipline folks talk about that. But yeah, there is a next step. After it leaves the annual reports unit, it kind of goes to another unit, and they take it from there. But we don't ignore it.
So just to clarify, so if they are late in submitting this report, there's no fine in terms of per day
I'm sorry?
being late. If they're late in submitting their annual report, there's no fine for.
There are kind of two tiers of fines. There's a group of schools that just don't submit at all, despite our efforts to reach out, and then there are groups that do submit, but they're late for whatever reason. So we would look at those schools and deal with those schools a little bit differently because obviously the first group maybe they're trying and they have submitted something, but it's not the entire report, and so our analysts still reach out to the schools to try to get them to submit it. So that's a different group than schools that just kind of ignore us.
So you mentioned from the point of receipt that the annual report might be evaluated and analyzed down the road by other colleagues. So can you explain a little bit procedurally about what happens? I mean, are you just looking for complete reports and then following up with folks rather than looking at the content of what's in the reports or making some evaluation or analysis at that point? What are your analysts looking for? Are they just looking to see that categories have been filled in and that they're complete? Or are there, certain red flags or signs that your folks are looking for that might inform the work of your colleagues down the road?
Sure. It's a little of both, actually. So initially, they do a quantitative review, and they're looking to make sure that if the catalog is supposed to be submitted as part of the annual report, that's submitted, that we have a school performance fact sheet for every program that's approved. There's kind of somewhat of a checklist of things that we look at that's really the quantitative. And then what we do is we look at red flags. We work with a compliance unit. So if the compliance unit is scheduling an inspection, they may ask us to look at the annual report a little bit more deeply, and we'll do that. Obviously, red flags, schools of concern, we would look at those reports a little bit more in detail.
Would your folks have those red flags per se, or would they have been trained somewhere along the line to identify those proactively, or would you be getting that information from like other units?
They're trained to look at red flags. Yeah, it's mainly what they're looking at is a disparity between all the different documents that we receive. So the annual report is a lot of data. It's a lot of information, and we make sure that, for example, their educational programs, if they provide 10 programs and they're only approved for 9, then that would be a red flag, and we would look at their catalog. We would look at other documents and kind of figure out what was going on with the school. So that would be one example of a red flag.
Thanks.
Sure.
So these statistics, though, simply say whether or not the submission was on time. These would, even if the submission had red flags, it would be counted as submitted on time in this page, in this report.
Potentially, yes.
Any other questions on the annual reports? Public comment on annual reports before we go on to Robert's other day job? All right, so next up on the agenda is the Quality of Education Report. Mr. Bales, nice to see you.
So I'm looking at the first attachment is attachment 5F, Foxtrot, page 39. It's a status update of our Senate Bill 1247 schools. If you remember from the last few meetings, these are the schools that are unaccredited but offering degree programs and working to become accredited. So this first bucket of schools on this page are the schools that were in operation already as of January 1st, 2015, and offering degree programs. This group of schools we're tracking to accreditation by July 1st of this year. I can't believe it's been 5 years. If you look at the chart, it kind of outlines the status of those schools. We identified 142 institutions back in 2014. 38 of them have since closed. 18 have been verified as exempt. 16 schools surrendered their degree programs. We have 4 that are currently suspended. 30 became accredited, and 36 are pursuing accreditation. They have achieved pre-accreditation, and they're working on becoming accredited again by July 1st of this year. Any questions on those schools?
Thanks, Robert. I have a question.
Sure.
Are there any trends that you can discuss about the accreditors for those 30 schools that did become accredited, or the 36 that are pursuing accreditation?
As far as which accreditor they chose?
Is it just across the board? Are you seeing any trends?
Yeah, I think Margaret had asked me that about a year ago, and I did provide some information. I could certainly provide that at the next meeting because it might have changed since then. We have quite a bit of schools choosing WASC, which is it's a tough accreditor, but they're a regional accreditor. They're pretty strong. But then we also find that schools have a problem getting through their accreditation process. So initially, and I think I showed this in my analysis about a year ago, there's a direct correlation between the schools that choose WASC initially and the schools that don't make it by the 2-year or the 5-year mark. But I can bring that information next time.
Yeah,
next
thanks.
meeting.
I know that it's been an ongoing discussion, but I just wondered if there had been additional changes or trends that you've noticed beyond what we've seen before.
And Robert, on this list where you say surrendered degree programs and then currently suspended, when you say currently suspended, you mean the institution is currently suspended or just their programs?
The institution's programs are currently suspended, but I believe with those 4 schools, they only have degree programs. So in essence, they're suspended.
Gotcha.
The institution is suspended. Okay, and my second,
I'm sorry, Robert, I had one other question real quick.
Sure.
Do you have any insight regarding the closed institutions, the degree to which this legislation or this regulatory change was a precipitating event, or was it unrelated that they were just closed anyway?
Great question. Some were unrelated, but some were related. Some of the schools the accreditation process is very expensive, and they just decided that they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to go through it, and ultimately closed. Others closed just for other reasons, lack of enrollments and things like that. If you would like, I could probably research that and bring that next time too.
No, thanks. I'm fine.
Yeah. So the next bucket of schools on the next chart. Now these are schools that were approved after January 1st, 2015, and they have received a provisional approval to operate degree programs. They're limited to 2 degree programs, and the requirement is for them to become pre-accredited in 2 years and accredited in 5 years. So unlike the first group, where they're all kind of in the same bucket driving toward that July 1st deadline, the deadlines are for these schools are based on when they were approved, so they're kind of scattered. Of these schools, 6 have closed. 1 was verified as exempt. 4 schools surrendered their degree programs. 3 are currently suspended. 4 have become accredited. And 39 are pursuing accreditation right now. We're tracking them to accreditation.
What's remind me of the date by which they have to become accredited?
For this group of schools, it's 2 years after they're provisionally approved. They have to be pre-accredited and 5 years to become accredited. And then SB 1192 actually provided an extension of 2 years for the schools that are making strong progress.
Any other questions for Robert on this one? All right, great. Thank you, Robert. Before we move on, does anybody have any public comment on the quality of education report? Great. Beth Squared approaches the table. G, compliance and discipline report. Welcome, Beth and Beth.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Beth Scott. I'm going to speak to you today regarding compliance inspections, discipline, and citations. So the first, I'm going to talk about inspections. It's attachment 5G, starting on page 43. Really excited to let you know, January of this year, we did the record number of inspections since I've been with the Bureau. So we did 51 inspections. So all of our improvements and our collaboration throughout the units is paying off now. So during this time, we also had 6 cancellations of inspections. The reasons for the cancellations are listed at the bottom. Could be the school was not where it was supposed to be when we showed up, or they refused an inspection, which would result in a citation being issued. Or the number would have been up to 57. So I'm anticipating with the improvements that we've made and our stabilization of staff and our move and everything that's working now, this number will at least hold or increase for this year. Are there any questions regarding inspections?
I don't have a question. I just want to say I think I said this last time, it's nice to see that you're doing so many unannounced inspections. I think that's evidence of your seriousness regarding finding things that are problematic and seeing what's really going on. So kudos
Yes.
on that.
Yeah.
And I have
Thank
to
you.
give Beth and her team kudos for the work they're doing. As she said, these are record numbers, and her team is doing an amazing job. And I think with the reorg and the restructuring and also having everybody under one roof has been a huge piece just in communication and everybody working together. So once again, kudos to you and your team.
Thank you very much. We are also excited for our new IT project. Sean was mentioning some of the automation. We have automated some using tablets and able to email, but we're anticipating some GPS capabilities and some handheld devices, which will even increase the efficiencies in our inspections. So we're working really closely with Robert in this area.
Do you think you'll be able to keep the pace of 51
No,
per
I think
month?
that we are going to improve that.
Wow. Yeah. Slow your roll, Beth.
Wait, this is not being recorded, right? I really do. Staff are very motivated. I think this number is a huge number, but I do think with the collaboration with the units and the processes that we have and the motivation of staff that this number is going to hold or increase.
And so for that 51, how many human beings conducted those 51?
Well, we have 12 inspectors. So we have a couple inspectors that are staff service analyst level that do announced inspections.
Okay.
They do less complex, they don't do degree granting. So then we have seasoned inspectors who focus. We have the prioritization, so our inspections are driven on the need to be at the school. So we have inspectors that focus on some difficult schools. So their overall numbers might be lower, but the complexity of that inspection, or if we coordinate with other boards and bureaus to do a joint visit, or with our investigative staff on a more complex, their numbers might be less. And then we have, the streamline inspectors that are a group of schools that are in close proximity. We're really careful about, they're within could be the same shopping mall, could be within a mile, where they can do a couple inspections. And then if they get to a school and the school isn't where it needs to be, they have something on deck to go to the next one. They don't just turn around and come home.
Gotcha. That's,
That makes sense?
51 in a month, that is
a lot.
That's, on average 4 a month for each person. That's more than that, actually, but that's a lot to get done, so that's amazing.
Yeah, we have a goal of 3, and they are a little competitive. Yeah, and just driven staff. It's just boils down to trying to get this work done.
I have a quick question, Beth. Congratulations again on
Thank
that great
you.
improvement. Can you describe for us the change between 18 and 19 in notice to complies and enforcement referrals? And remind me of the distinction between the two. Enforcement referrals increased appreciably and notice to comply dropped a little bit. Is there any story behind those changes?
Well, part of that would be that we did more unannounced inspections. So some of that could be more things went to citation. We also have been collaborating with the other units within the Bureau. So we may, without going too deep into it, things that occur simultaneously in the Bureau. More items are identified. We are just getting better at identifying issues that we need to find. Like Margaret brings up, we are just better at identifying what needs, better at collaborating across the board, with other boards, with the Bureau internally, with our mechanisms and our processes that we're identifying more that we need to identify is the short answer.
And distinguish for me again, I apologize, between notice to comply and enforcement referral, just really quickly distinguish those two things.
Well, a notice to comply is, and another thing I want to bring up is that I don't think there's ever been a time when an inspector went to a school and didn't identify a minor violation. So schools have the opportunity, while the inspection is going on, to correct any minor violations and not get a notice to comply. So when you see a low number of notice to comply, that doesn't mean that we went to that many schools and there wasn't minor violations. It means that staff worked very diligently with the school to correct those minor violations prior to leaving, and the school didn't get a notice to comply.
And real quick with that, Beth, and I think that's a different approach, to be quite honest, in regards to us trying to educate and not just trying to constantly drop the hammer. I think this is an opportunity for us that I take pride in, is being able to work with these institutions on fixing the minor, the notice to complies, versus just saying, hey, here's a fine. No. Let's educate them and work with them to hopefully put them in a better place to be more in compliant. So once again, I think that's just maybe a different approach than how it's been handled historically.
Sure, and I agree and encourage that approach. I think it's most effective for helping students.
Yes.
I would encourage you, especially in light of the new data system, to be able to track like remediated issues or issues addressed on the day of, right? So, because there could be an appearance to outside observers, and I might have just, my sunset hat on, but if it looks like something went down, but you're actually fixing the problems, that isn't shown here, right?
Yes.
Because you actually helped students in a way that is not being measured because you didn't issue notice to comply, right? So there should be like a total problems found, this many resolved on site, and then these resulted in a notice to comply. So you see the gross number increase.
Yes, I agree. We also are very cognizant of making sure that our workshops are full. So the inspectors are also reporting. A lot of times the schools are much more well-informed, having been through workshops, or our new school analyst that works with newly approved schools for the first year, to get them into a workshop to work with them on the responsibilities. So inspectors are saying that when they show up at the schools are more prepared than they have seen in the past.
Right. And then real quickly, enforcement referrals.
So an enforcement referral is anything that it cannot be fixed relatively soon, or that's statutorily material, like school performance fact sheets, violations, annual fees, things that are not considered minor or need some additional investigation. Might be looking at some refund issues, or things that need a little bit deeper dive than could put on a NTC, or that an inspector could address for that day.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Beth, thanks for the information and for the good work. We've talked about this over the past number of years. Do you have a current average for the length of time inspectors are at a site for an announced and an unannounced?
Typically, for an announced, there's a lot of work that goes
There's
on
the desk work.
Yeah, prior. So if it's announced, we notify the school, we identify what deficiencies that we can identify and let them know in advance, and they work with the staff in the office to rectify those deficiencies prior to arrival. Of course, when you get on site, you have to make sure that you're looking at the right catalog, you're looking at the enrollment agreement, and you're looking at a lot of student files, you're surveying students. So an announced inspection is going to be the better part of an 8-hour day, probably 6 to 7 hours, even with that back and forth work, because we're trying to, we're surveying students, we're helping the school with the tracking, like Dr. Marian points out, educating them. So a lot of times when we're there, they're happy we're there, and they have a lot of questions on, tracking their school performance data, or have some licensing questions that we can help facilitate getting them in touch with licensing for the day. For an unannounced, our process, it really just depends. Typically, time-wise, it's about the same amount of time. It's just a little bit more chaotic because the school isn't expecting us, or we didn't have access to the documents in advance. So if they're not on the website or weren't given to us with the annual report. We have to look at the catalog in its entirety on site in some instances. So it's usually the entire day. If it goes smoothly, I've seen an inspector do 2 in a day. I've also seen an inspector have to go back the next day.
That's helpful. And then is there a breakdown in terms of location, like Northern California versus Southern California? Is there a concentration of unannounced versus announced in certain geographic regions? Like, are we doing more unannounced in the Sacramento area? Have we seen any trends in that?
Well, we work with the prioritization on what schools we inspect, which have the criteria for that. We also have to do the 2 inspections in a 5-year period, so announced and unannounced. So we have more schools in Southern California. We have a lot of schools in the Bay Area. So it really is based on what makes sense to be cognizant of travel expenses and getting the most for somebody being in the area versus what school is on deck to need their inspection. So the inspectors are very cognizant about planning their trip. If they're driving, they're doing a school on their way to their destination and they're doing one on the way back, or they're staying and doing a couple in close proximity to cut down on, the expenses. So it really more in Southern California, and the schools closer are on the same track as the other schools, but they're better for us to inspect those for training. Because if you have to have 2 staff go for training purposes, you don't incur the costs for a flight to train somebody here. So it's really regulated by the law that says we have to inspect twice in the 5-year period.
Thanks. And then my last question is, you mentioned the coordinated efforts with other entities. I'm assuming the primary coordination is with other DCA entities. And can you talk about how often those coordinated inspections have occurred, especially in your new ramp up and numbers? Like, how many of the 51, for example, if any, were coordinated with anybody else? And we can talk about enforcement, but do those result in any violations of the Act as well as another agency's laws?
Well, if another entity goes with us, another board or bureau, then they would handle the violations that they accrue. If an inspector and investigator from our office go together and we identify some material violations, then they would be handed off to the investigator during the day. So of the 51, it's probably now the need, because our investigations are lower. There's not as many schools with open complaints. So it's probably about 10% now, whereas last year when we were working through a lot of the complaints, there was a lot more schools that had the need for the travel together. But we do make sure that if we're going to a school that another board has interest in, we let them know that we're going to be going. Do they want to participate, or is there any information that they can give us prior to our arrival that will help point us into an area that we need to look at?
And is that, again, just with DCA entities, or could it be other?
It could be
third parties or other governmental agencies.
We work closely with accrediting and Department of Education. So it's not just boards and bureaus, it's anyone who has an interest in the school that would help us protect students.
On the schools that refused inspections from last year, I doubt you'd have answers for this year, but are those, so far, have they been all resolved at the citation stage? Are any of them in litigation, or how do those wind up, basically?
So I can't guarantee that the 6 for this month have been issued, but they are prioritized. it's not all refusals. It could be that they're not where they need to be at the time. If the inspector gets there and
Yeah, just the ones that are refused.
oh, the citation would be done. Our goal is to have a citation from an inspection done within 2 weeks. So,
And at that point, then, do they comply? So far, I mean,
not always.
and then what?
Well, I was going to speak to that. If a school does not comply with a citation, then they are referred to the Attorney General's office for further action.
Beth, quick question.
Yes.
I'm going to use the excuse that I'm new a lot. Can you take me through really quickly, just high level, when your inspectors arrive on a school campus, what are they looking for generally, and what are they kind of inspect for?
Well, they're looking at the minimum operating standards. So if it's an announced inspection, they've went through all of the documents that we have at our disposal or the school sends us, and identify any deficiencies, let the school know that, this is in your catalog, or you're advertising some programs that need to be cleared up through licensing, or so there could be a lot of items cleared up prior to the arrival. When the inspector gets to the school, they set up, they request files, student files randomly, and they review student files, faculty files. They survey students without school personnel there, do a survey, answer any questions. They look at the backup documentation for school performance fact sheets. They look at having done some research prior to arrival, making sure that we have all of the contact information. When we get back into the office, we reach out to students to make sure that what they're reporting on the school performance fact sheets is accurate. So we'll reach out to independently verify that data. If it's unannounced, the same thing happens. It's just chaotic, a little bit more intrusive and chaotic and surprising for the school. But after the initial arrival, the schools are generally cooperative and want to assist and get information. So it's the minimum operating standards that we're looking at. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay.
Can I just ask a follow-up on that? When you say survey students, is that you bring a cohort of students into a room and you have a group conversation, or is it individual interviews, or a mix?
It could be both. We ask the school to just allow us 10 or 15 minutes, and the faculty will step out and we will pass out surveys. Students may feel comfortable filling them out. We let them know who we are, ask them some questions. Sometimes, and we give cards, so if the students aren't comfortable at the time, we will get calls after we leave. And they may have questions. They may, and a lot of it's positive things they're telling us about the school. It's not always negative. So it could be that the students approach the inspectors after the classroom setting if they're just more comfortable, or after we leave. But for the most part, they fill out the survey. They don't put their name on them, and we just collect the information and review it at a later time.
One question I had was, when we looked at some of the complaints, I think in our last meeting, or the meeting, I think it was the last meeting, and I have also looked at some of the inspections where there was a citation issued and what the requirement was. It seemed to me that in many cases, let's say the violation was they didn't have student fact sheets in the file, and that you determined from a random sampling, that the requirement was simply to get those into those particular files, or to say that they would do it in the future. But I'm wondering, are you able to, in those circumstances where there is you see a violation and there's a citation, require that they then re-notify all of the, for example, all of the students who enrolled during a certain period with provide them the information so that they would then have that information and could decide, I'm not going to stay with this school. They told me it was 90% job placement, and I turn out, now I get the sheet, I see that's only 20%. That's just an example. Are there other instances in which when you issue a citation, the requirement to fulfill deal with the citation would also then make sure that students are somehow given redress for what has occurred because of that violation?
Oh, okay. Well, the citation is a public document, and we, having the school go back and have students sign something or get something doesn't really rectify a violation. That is a point in time.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that there be a requirement that they provide the missing fact sheets to, whatever group of students you think appropriate, where you could see, hey, we're not seeing it done regularly as it should be during this period of time. Not necessarily having to have the students sign it, but at least that they would get that information. And then if students wanted to cancel, that they would have a legitimate ground to do so without having to pay a penalty for it.
I don't
As
think
an
that
example.
we have put that as an abatement to that degree in our citations at this
Right.
point.
Okay, that's something I hope that going forward that the Bureau can look at as to whether the rectification of an issue based on a citation, that more can be done to make sure that the students who are harmed by that violation actually have it's been corrected, not just by, well, going forward we won't do it anymore, but okay, as to those where we made the error or the violation in the past, this is what we'll do to rectify that situation.
All right, we'll look
Thank
into
you.
it. Thank you.
Just one other thing. I am so delighted to see what a tremendous increase in inspections there were last year, and I compliment you and the entire Bureau for the changes that were made to try to get that done. Look forward to seeing that going on. And I won't ask again when you think you'll get caught
Thank
up.
you.
Because you've done a really great job getting where you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just that was on record, right? Everybody has that.
At least today I won't ask.
I'm banning you from the next meeting from asking about it. And I will say also thank you, great job. And just, for those who are around the table, having worked with schools for the past 20 years, I would say that most of the time, schools are maybe a little surprised when you show up unannounced, but they really want to be doing things right. Schools are, for the most part, not out there just, flying by the seat of their pants. They're trying to do the right thing, but they're, often confused. And so when the Bureau comes out and does an inspection and can walk through all these pieces with the school is learning from that. And I encourage you, as Mike said, to continue to use that opportunity for the schools to take advantage of what you can provide, because they don't want to get in trouble. They want to do things right. So this is a great opportunity for them to learn from you. So
I agree.
Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Going to be moving on to discipline, which is page 45 and 46. So we currently have 11 accusations pending at the Attorney General's office, 9 statement of issues. We've added a stat that was asked for, so we're tracking that now. Cases rejected by the DAG, which in 2019 was 3. Thus far this year, we haven't had any rejections. We are monitoring our cases very efficiently with the Attorney General's office. Our cases move through each step as quickly as possible.
Can I ask a question? Oh,
Sure.
Unless you're not done. And then,
I'm done.
okay. I reviewed the Sunset Report. It's very detailed and long. And I'm trying to understand, because the Bureau identifies that this actual harm requirement under the statutory law is an issue in regards specifically to AG referrals. And what I'm trying to understand is when you were just speaking earlier about citations, what happens when they're still violating whatever you cited them for after the citation eventually gets referred to the Bureau. But aren't there a number of violations that cannot be referred to the Bureau because they don't fall under the material harm requirements? Am I missing something, I very well could be.
Well, not abiding by a citation is different than that issue, so.
Right. So I think you're obviously, in regards to talking to Sunset, you're talking about the student harm piece.
Right.
And so what happens in a lot of, not a lot, in some of these cases are, and Margaret talks about this sometimes, about why isn't the Bureau out, trying to shut down the school or do something. Often, in order for us to take certain actions, we need to see student harm, proven student harm, and it needs to be communicated to us. And I think that's where it gets a little bit sticky for the Bureau in some cases to move forward because of that limitation. And so I think that's something that's why you see it in our Sunset report, because that is a significant piece of the Bureau's discipline and enforcement process. I think moving forward is that what we don't want to do is wait till the harm has occurred. We want to be more proactive at protecting the student. But in some of these cases, not a lot, but we definitely have to wait for harm to occur, which is, and I think a lot of us would agree that that's not the best way to go about it.
I agree with that. I guess I'm trying to figure out a more technical question, which it sounds like what you're saying is in order to pursue certain types of sanctions, you need that. And I read the law that way too. But to refer something to the AG, you don't necessarily need to show that. Is that right?
Yes, we do. We do.
Okay.
But not abiding by the citation abatement is separate. It's the same as, misrepresentation in an application that has its own authority. So that's different than just the wrongdoing of a school where we have to show actual harm versus potential harm.
My question really is, from my understanding of the law, is a school could be cited for a fact sheet issue, right? But that isn't going to be under the material that's not listed in the statute as something that...
It is.
It is, okay. Okay. So
it is statutorily a material violation.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, but you would still need to show actual harm before you could do something more drastic.
Yes, unless it's a citation that the school does not abide by.
Okay, got it.
And to deal with that requirement for harm, that has to be dealt with legislatively, correct?
Correct.
So hopefully that's something we can do this year. Sarah?
Okay, I'm moving on to page 47, which is our citation and fine. So in 2019, we issued 334 citations. We did add a stat for the number of schools cited for those citations, since that's been a question brought up. So hoping that gives some clarity to the citations. We've added the most common violations for the last 4 years. There was some discussion earlier regarding the failure to submit an annual report and the school performance fact sheet, and Robert touched on that a bit. But yes, if a school fails to submit their annual report and is not attempting to submit the annual report, there is a fine associated with that. And it's typically a $5,000 fine, depending on if they're working with us, just not understanding or need some clarification. That's different than ignoring the fact that they need to do their annual report. Are there any questions on citations? Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Welcome.
Hello, I'm Beth Danielson.
Hello, Beth.
Hello. Am I on? There we go. And I will be giving the complaint investigation report today. I am looking at attachment H, page 51. And if you look at the first and second chart on page 51, you'll see that in 2019, we closed 1,798 complaints, which was a 125% increase from 2018 and 196% increase from 2017. If you look at the third chart, titled Case Disposition, as you can see, due to popular demand, we have broken down the closure reasons further. 7% of our cases were referred for citation. Less than 1% was referred for disciplinary action. 7% of the cases, compliance was obtained by the school. 7% involved a mediated settlement and was resolved by the school. 9% involved closed schools and they were sent to the STRIF unit. 12% were non-jurisdictional and were either referred to other agencies or were exempt institutions. 32% of the complaints were unsubstantiated. After investigating the complaint in 13% of the cases, we found insufficient evidence to confirm a violation. 14% of the complaints were closed for other reasons, which includes consolidated cases and duplicate entries. And as I've mentioned previously, starting in June of 2019, we began referring cases over to the discipline unit for further action rather than referring them straight for to go for discipline action or for citation. So beginning in Q1 of 2020, our statistics will reflect this. But since June, we have referred 30 cases to the discipline unit. And the last chart on page 51, a question that I had received last time was, of the complaints we receive, how many schools does this involve? In Q4, we received a total of 213 complaints, and this involved 201 schools. That was the complaints were representative of 201 schools. Anybody have any questions there?
I'll just say that that is a very interesting statistic because I think people had the impression that there would be lots of complaints about the same school, but
Yes.
213 at 201 is a lot of one-offs at 200 schools.
Right, and Beth reported on the citations given as well, and it's also indicative there that the number of citations are issued to a number of schools rather than a small amount of schools.
Interesting.
Okay, moving on to page 52. The first chart indicates the days it takes us to close a case. And I'd like to point out that in 2019, we closed 47% of our cases within 180 days, which was up from 29% of the cases in 2018. And if you look at the second chart on page 52, the top 5 allegations, 4 of the top 5 allegations remain the same from Q3. The 5th top allegation was previously voucher fraud, and at the end of the year, that changed to being the 5th allegation being contractual quality of education. Quality of instruction.
What's the difference between those last two?
So the quality of education is if we get a complaint that the school isn't giving me what I need, just a general complaint of the school overall. The quality of instruction, we get several complaints about specific instructors, or they don't have enough instructors, or they're not qualified instructors. And moving on to page 53. On the top of page 53, you can see in the first chart that in 2019, we received 968 complaints, which was a 27% increase from 2018, and a 32% increase from 2017. In the second chart, this was also requested at the last meeting. In 2019, 92% of the complaints were externally generated complaints, which was up from 73% in 2018. And I can say that this is partially due to process changes that we've put in place between my unit and Beth's unit, where any material violation previously that an inspector found would be sent over to my unit as an enforcement referral. And now if that does not, first of all, STRIF violations, if it's just a STRIF violation is not coming to my unit, there's nothing else that needs to be done and it goes straight to citation. So we've reduced the number of enforcement referrals from Beth's unit to my unit, and they're able to streamline and go straight to citation.
So just to clarify, so if it's an internal complaint, in essence, and it has to do only with STRIF. It doesn't show up here as an internal complaint. It goes directly to the STRIF folks.
I believe she means school performance
I'm
fact
sorry.
sheets, not STRIF.
Not STRIF, I'm sorry, school performance fact sheets. Thank you.
Okay, so if it's a
Yes.
fact sheet, then it goes where?
It'll stay straight, well, it'll go to citation. Her inspectors will send
I
it to
see.
the discipline units for straight for
Immediately
citation.
without having to go
Yeah,
through.
and there's other cases too, other material violations they may find on site that don't require further investigation, so they're sent straight to citation rather than coming to our unit, which was the process in the past. So another streamlining of instance.
Is the policy as to what the resolution should be the same for whether it's an inspection, a violation discovered in inspection, or whether it's from a complaint? In other words, taking my example from before, they didn't provide fact sheets and it's discovered in an inspection, or you have a student complaint that says, they told me I would, that they'd graduated 90%, and then you check and you see, well, they never gave them a fact sheet showing it was really 20%. Is the resolution to that complaint handled similarly to citation? Others, I guess what I'm getting to is if it's a complaint, is there more done as far as getting redress for the student than if it's just a citation, or are they basically handled the same?
Well, if we have a specific student complaint, then our goal is to make that student whole. So if that particular complaint came in for a student, then we would send it over to citation in the same manner. However, if in the investigation there was proven student harm, we would go forward towards an accusation. Again, our ultimate goal is to make the student happy. So in your instance, if a student says, I wasn't provided this school performance fact sheet, they told me 90%, I now have it, and it's 20%, and they won't let me out of my contract, that may be something that the investigator would try to mitigate with the school and say, hey, you didn't do this. And then it would move forward to discipline with the facts involving that particular student, as well as any other students that may have been contacted. We would want to know if there's other students affected by the same issue.
And to add to that, myself, I've never seen a complaint such as that.
No.
Well, the complaint wouldn't be, I didn't get a fact sheet, because the students don't know they're supposed to get a fact sheet in the first place. The complaint would be, I can't get a job. They told me that everybody gets a job, and now I can't get a job, and I found out, 6 other students couldn't get a job, and they never really gave us the training we were supposed to get. And then when you investigate, you discover, that's, we have evidence of that, but we also have evidence they never gave him a fact sheet, for example. That's what I'm talking about.
It could be part of an investigation that if we were able to determine actual student harm for that, that would be a factor.
Actual student harm. So if I enroll at a school on the representation that 90% of the people get jobs in my field, and the truth is only 20% get jobs, and I don't get a job, is that sufficient, do you think, for student harm?
Depending on that, I don't know how much specifics we want to get into, but we would have to prove that that particular student is employable and able, so it boils down to a lot of investigation into that particular student being the fact they did or did not get a school performance
so even
fact
if they clearly misrepresented it, unless you can prove
that's a separate, would be a
in that
separate
particular
violation.
instance the student couldn't get a job because of the school, then you don't think you have the authority to actually provide a remedy or to seek a referral to the AG or something.
We could do a citation, but not an accusation.
Right. Wow. Yeah, a big problem.
Okay, moving on to page 54. The first chart represents our pending caseload at the end of 2019, which was 222 cases. This was down from 294 cases pending at the end of Q3. And as of this past Friday, February 14th, 58% of our pending cases are less than 90 days old, which is up from 46% of our cases that were 90 days old at the end of Q3. And I am pleased to say that as of today, we have 0 cases aged over 3 years, which is down from 138 cases at the end of 2018 and 13 cases at the end of Q3.
Awesome.
Any
Excellent.
questions there?
Good job on that. That's really good.
I have a couple of questions. The trend line is still sloping down. Do you have any sense of what would be fully current, or do you feel like you're still catching up, or have we reached equilibrium?
I think we had this conversation 3 months ago. I think that what I said was I didn't know that we had reached a real number. I think we're about there.
Got it.
You know, this ended at the end of 2019, and right now we're holding steady. Up and down maybe 40 cases, depending on what's coming in.
And I have a series of questions regarding the bottom chart on page 52, the top 5 allegations. Can you distinguish for me the difference between lack of or quality of education complaints and lack of or quality of instruction complaints? Does one relate to curriculum and materials and the other to teachers, or like how do you distinguish between those two?
So one, I mentioned that students will complain and just say, I'm not getting the education that I paid for. The school isn't organized, the school isn't providing me what I signed up for. Then we get specific complaints about specific instructors saying they're hiring people that just graduated from this program 6 months ago and don't know much more than I do. They're hiring people that don't have any business teaching. They don't have enough instructors. So one is more based on the school, and one is based on the actual people they have teaching the programs.
Mr. Holt, are you hazing my team?
No.
Okay, I just check.
No, yeah. And but in the insatiable quest for more information, I have a suggestion for that table. When you look on page 51 in the case dispositions, you'll see that roughly 40% of cases, or 45% of cases, are either unsubstantiated wholly or have insufficient evidence, right? Which, if you could layer on the top 5 allegations, the dispositions by category, for example, like in a stacked bar there. So when people are worried about their refund, if a student complains they didn't receive their refund, how many of those are unsubstantiated, right, or resolved, as opposed to quality of instruction issues? Because that's a very high number of these complaints they don't go anywhere, right? They're either unsubstantiated on their face, or there isn't evidence, right, to do that.
Right.
And so how is that spread across the allegations, right? Is there a certain type of allegation that is where the students are mostly wrong when they're complaining about that? And how does that vary? So for future reporting, that would just be helpful.
I think that might be something that would be more readily available with the new system.
The new data system, yeah.
Right.
That's a great point, though, Joe, because you don't know. An allegation is just that. It's not been investigated yet. And so if we have results that show that 80% of the quality of instruction are invalid, and it just turns out that this person has the right experience, they worked in the field, they have everything they need to qualify, they just are not good at their job, that's not a substantiated complaint. That just means that person's not a good teacher, but it doesn't mean they weren't qualified.
And speaking as an institutional representative, many of our students are pre-professional prior to entering educational institution. They've had difficult experience with previous post-secondary ed. 50% have attended community college before they came to our schools. And so oftentimes they're struggling themselves, right, in terms of life skills and figuring things out. And so when they become dissatisfied, it would be helpful to have insight into what areas of sensitivity are you finding substantial evidence that schools are not doing what they ought, and where else might we provide more instruction and training for the students themselves, right?
Right.
I have a question.
Sure.
I fear that I've asked you this before, so my apologies if I have. On page 54, the chart breaks down pending, ex-student, and urgent.
Correct.
Can you remind me what those I know what pending means. but with the other
So
two.
the external student, that's the, these are complaints that came in from students, external complaints.
Yeah, and so as to urgent, what constitute urgent? That was my main question.
So again, this is a statutory, and the program is built into our spreadsheet that we use in assigning based on the statutory requirements of when something becomes urgent. I also mentioned last time, that although something may not be statutorily urgent, I have moved cases up to an urgent level based on the facts of the case, based on the complaint. We never move anything down, but I will move something up based on the facts.
Does anybody have that statutory citation off the top of their head, just so it might be useful?
There is. I do not know what it is off the top of my head.
I don't either. Anyway, maybe just send us an email or something to remind us,
Sure.
everybody, what those, I think there's a regulation and there's a statute both that deal with priorities.
We'll have Richie send it out.
Okay, and looking at the last page, page 55, this illustrates the student impact the Complaint Investigation Unit has achieved through advocacy on behalf of students. And I would like to note that in Q4 alone, we were able to recover $52,784.97 in refunds to students or to their federal aid account, bringing the total for 2019 to $171,654.74. I would also like to, in speaking about student impact, I would like to mention that since the inception of the Special Investigations Unit, we have reassigned 39 of the more complex and aged cases. We have assigned 91 new cases to that team. And the team has attended 2 search warrants with district attorneys' offices, as those offices had requested assistance from us in identifying our documents and how they may relate to their criminal cases. And from August through December of 2019, we were able to send 1 or more special investigators to different schools within days of being notified that the school may be in serious trouble. In 2018, we would have never been able to do this just based on the volume of cases that we had.
That is just wonderful that you're able to get investigators out there that quickly. I mean, that's really what we need to be doing.
And I think it's been noticed in the industry as well. Anybody have any questions?
Can you just repeat that data? I wasn't prepared to write down.
Sure. The special
data
investigator?
that's not on page 55.
Okay. In regarding, in Q4, we recovered $52,000.
Yeah, I see that.
And we had our first couple of special investigators on board in mid-August. The others came on in September. And since that time, we have reassigned 39 of the more complex and aged cases to that team. We've also assigned 91 new cases to them. They've attended 2 search warrants with district attorneys' offices. That was it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other question for the Beths before they depart? Thank you both. Excellent report. Thank you very much.
I'm not departing yet.
Beth number 2.
That's
Continue.
Okay. Oh, thanks. My sidekick's going to stick with me. I'm going to give an update on Video Symphony.
Oh, sorry about that. I missed it altogether.
That's okay. Video Symphony initially received Bureau approval in 1997. At some point prior to 2015, Video Symphony lost its funding from the Department of Education, closed down relatively quickly, and went into bankruptcy. In 2015, before they finished the bankruptcy, they surrendered their approval back to the Bureau. The owner of the school previously licensed Video Symphony Intertraining, Inc., is no longer in existence. Since the closure of Video Symphony Entertaining, the Bureau has processed several claims under the Student Tuition Recovery Fund and has paid out over $200,000 to former students. The Bureau has been made aware that one of the former owners of Video Symphony Entertraining, Inc. has filed suit against a number of former Video Symphony students. There appear to be several lawsuits in Southern California. Because Video Symphony Entertraining is the school that the Bureau initially licensed, is no longer in existence, no longer has Bureau approval, and because the Bureau is not a party to any of the civil lawsuits, the Bureau has no jurisdiction under our laws and could not appear or assist the students with any pending legal cases. However, any former Video Symphony students who need assistance are encouraged to contact the Office of Student Assistance and Relief, even if they have previously filed a claim. The Bureau has also recently received 4 written public comments from former students, and Richie will provide these comments to the committee at this time. Thank you.
I have some questions about Video Symphony. Do you know if they are still in bankruptcy?
I think they've completed bankruptcy, correct?
Thanks, Richie.
Yeah.
The reason I'm asking is because if that transaction where the owner took over those contracts occurred while they were in bankruptcy, there may be some issues there. I understand, this is a pretty outrageous situation because he's collecting on contracts for education that apparently wasn't provided, as I understand what's been going on. I assume the Bureau, or maybe I shouldn't assume, has reached out to other enforcement agencies to try to deal with this, or not?
We are not receiving complaints at this point from students. There's civil lawsuits pending, so
Right.
we don't have anything to do with that.
Right, but that wouldn't prevent you from communicating with law enforcement agencies where you're aware of, that there is a big issue. I mean, there's nothing to stop you from doing that.
Sure, but I think it's important to state that, and I think Beth did a good job in stating that, unfortunately, that they no longer fall under our jurisdiction. But in regards to supporting students, we strongly encourage them to reach out to OSAR to see if we can assist them. But as far as legal matters, we have nothing to do with them, and it's been 5 years.
Well, has the Bureau turned over the information it has to any law enforcement agencies? It certainly had jurisdiction at the time that some of these things were going on.
So once again, this is something that occurred 5 years ago. We will definitely be open to working with any other law enforcement agencies, but at this point in time, there's none that have reached out to us.
And the Bureau hasn't reached out to any agencies, as I understand your answer.
Not at this point, no.
Right, right. And so basically, I mean, it's great that you're going to be able to reimburse those students, but basically what's going to happen is that then they're going to use that to pay off this prior owner. So he is going to have basically screwed up their lives and now make the money for it. So it's a really horrible situation. So I guess I understand you no longer have jurisdiction. Thanks.
Quick question. For occurrences like this when schools close, are there requirements for the school to let their former students know about STRIF and OSAR and to get in touch, or what process?
There is a closed school process that the school is supposed to follow, yes, which can include a teach-out plan. There's a whole closed school packet that they complete to provide to us, and it has to be provided us in a certain period of time prior to the school closure. It doesn't mean that always happens.
Okay. Do you know if it happened in this case?
I do not know that. I don't believe so, but I do not know whether it happened.
And there's no repercussions if they don't follow the closure process?
There are repercussions currently if they don't follow. There's disclosures that schools must let students know about STRIF while they're operating, so the students have that information. And there's also requirements that they let us know timely that they're closing and inform students of that. If schools don't do that currently, they will get a citation for that. The citations can be difficult to follow through once a school has closed, but we will do what we can to assist the students and put something on record so people are aware of what the school has done and try to find the records and make the students whole.
I think this is a good example also in talking about the new IT system. This is kind of information that needs to be incorporated into the new system so that it's available, so the next time this same person applies to operate another school, that information is readily available so that you can see the past history. So it's just one area where transferring data is really important.
Yeah, I
even
agree.
Going back much longer than 5 years.
That's a good point.
And I would like to add another great reason or another student impact benefit that we've had with the Special Investigative Unit in having been able to get them out within sometimes the next day, sometimes a couple of days even, is we're looking for any sign that the school may be about to close, among other things. But, you know, we want to get a current student roster. We always collect that for the STRIF unit. And we want to be in there before they close their doors, and we don't have any, we have less ability to contact these students. If we get there and the students are there and things are really bad, then we can collect information before it actually happens. So that's been very beneficial.
I'm sorry, let me just make sure I understand this. So you have a school, and let's assume that the school defrauded students. And then at some point they close, they surrender their approval. The Bureau has the ability to bring a lawsuit to get restitution, among other things, against an institution. Does that authority end once the school is no longer an approved institution? I'm not sure that that's the case, but something maybe to...
So I think that, yeah, that's something for us to take back and maybe have some conversation with legal counsel just to make sure clear, and I don't want to answer and get that wrong, so let us get back to you on that one.
Well, and there are times too that schools attempt to surrender their approval and we won't accept it because there's something going on. So we might mitigate and say, you need to do X, Y, and Z before we will accept your approval. Any further questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Sure.
I had a question percolating. I just don't know if you're the right person to ask. You know, as detailed in the Sunset Report, these closure plans aren't always followed because you've got a school in bankruptcy and the incentive, the citation threat is not much of a threat. Who in the Bureau handles trying to figure out what to do about student records? I mean, who triages that question and how to make sure that they don't just disappear and that someone is managing access to student records?
We do have a closed school analyst, but we also are working proactively, like prior to going out and inspecting or during the licensing process, to make sure that those items, we've collected those items on the school. So should the school close, we preemptively have that information. So we're proactive in making sure we have the contact for that very reason. But we do have a closed school analyst that works with schools planning on closing and then works on the cases that close abruptly.
Right.
Okay. So that person would then be in charge of alerting you all to, we don't have the records, or, you know, that person sort of alerts the Bureau and the Bureau then takes that on as an issue?
Well, it could come from any unit that within
Okay.
the Bureau that identifies a school. You know, it could be returned mail from the admin unit. That's an indication that the school, it could come from any, and it's centralized with a closed school analyst, and we are,
Okay.
looking at the strength of our regulations under that section also.
Okay.
That's why you see some of the stuff in our sunset report around surety bonds and other things that allow for us, if a school does close, and that we have something in place to help secure records and those types of things. Because once again, there's a small portion or a portion of schools that just close.
Right.
And the last thing we want to do is allow that to happen, in a sense of students being able to come, they show up to school and it's a lock on the door.
Yeah.
And so I think some of the things that you see in our sunset report are hopefully trying to address some of those things that you're bringing up.
Yeah, so I guess I'm sorry to continue this. My inferences from the sunset report is that you don't currently have the capacity you need in this regard. And it's a very important thing to students for future jobs and future educational opportunities. So I just wanted to get a sense of, is it more people, like what, and maybe you don't feel comfortable answering this at this point, but what is missing now to ensure that if they don't have a closure plan, if they don't appoint a custodian, that those records don't get lost?
Sure. I think that's why you see everything we have in the sunset report to address that exact question. Yeah, I think we had 21 recommendations that can help support those things from happening. So I think those are the things that would help us.
Yeah. Okay.
Now you can go. Thank you both very much. Before we move on to the next item, any public comment relating to the complaints and discipline report and investigation?
Angela Perry with TCAS. I'll just echo the enthusiasm for the clear and marked increase in the amount of complaints and inspections. It is very encouraging and more evidence of the progress that the Bureau has been making in recent years. And so really want to take the opportunity to lift that up. I'll also echo some of the comments around sunset review, and as we are moving into this and identifying the needs of the Bureau and the things that the Bureau needs to be able to accomplish the goals that you've set out here, and if there are ways that we can work with the Bureau to help make that possible. I think another thing that is that would be helpful as we start to think about all of this, especially as we think about students and how we manage those relationships, is maybe getting a sense of some of the workflows in these departments and how complaints are handled and what that process looks like, to make sure that there are checks and balances and that all of those interests are being represented, and if there are ways that we can improve that to better serve students, I think that needs to be the ultimate goal. So if there are ways that we can be helpful in making any of those processes work better, both for the Bureau and for students, we would be really enthusiastic about helping with that. So thank you.
Thank you. So next up, licensing report.
So this is our new licensing chief, Ebony Santee. Everybody remembers Marina O'Connor, who has transitioned
Back to the medical board.
back
right?
to the medical board. Kim's team stole her from us, but we have a rock star, and I'm excited for her to give her report.
Welcome. You're on. Oop, you turned it off. There you go.
Good afternoon. So I will be highlighting a few statistics. Agenda item 5I.
Who are you?
As you just said, my name is Ebony Santee, and I've been with the Bureau for a little over 4.5 years. Initially, I was in the Quality of Education unit, and I previously worked in private post-secondary before coming to the Bureau.
Great, welcome. Bring some wealth of experience with you.
So as of January 1, 2020, we received a total of 482 applications. 32 of those were new full approvals, 21 being new.
I mean, can you move the microphone down just a little bit, because I'm having
Can you hear me?
kind of coming in and out.
Better?
Better, thank you.
Okay, I'll stay right here. 21 of those were for full accreditation, 29 renewals, 39 renewal of accredited institutions, 84 change applications, 109 for changes for accredited institutions, 131 verifications of exemption, and 37 out-of-state registration. As of January 1, there were 24 pending new full applications. I will say that as of today, that's actually down to 22, and 9 of those are actually incomplete. So until we get more information, we can't move forward with those. In that last box for the oldest pending applications, our oldest full application in the queue is March 25th of 2019, and actually that's an incomplete application. So again, until we get more information, we can't process this. As far as the oldest full app under review, there is a 9 from 2017, but that is in the process of the denial process currently. So that should be cleared shortly. Any questions on this chart? The 2 charts on page 61 are just a comparison from the last few fiscal years between the amounts of new full approval applications that we've completed and accredited approval applications that we've received. I think that might have been a question from a previous meeting, so we wanted to include that information. Is there any questions? And my last bit of information on page 63 is the total number of schools by location and type, and that approval type as of January 1. So as far as main locations, we had 1,043, 377 branches, 537 satellites, which gave us a total of 1,957. And as far as approval types, and I'm looking at that second section, for approved by means of accreditation, there were 435. For full approvals, there were 570. No conditional approvals, and 38 of those were provisional. And I also believe from your last meeting, there was a question about how many out-of-state registrations, and as of February 13, we have 44. Are there any questions?
Good.
Thank you.
We're going easy on you because it's your first meeting. Prepare yourself. And Lisa, you didn't even have to say anything. She's so good.
She did wonderful.
Any questions for Ebony before they step away from the? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Any public comment on the licensing section before we move on to OSAR? Before Mike coughs himself to death over here. Yeah, right. Oh, the kid Petri dishes are doing this to you? I'm staying away from you. We do Scott and then do it. Can you make it? Okay, welcome Scott. Our OSAR report.
Good morning, Scott Valverde, OSAR Chief, and happy as always to provide an update on our activities supporting students through our various types of outreach efforts. So I'm going to be speaking to attachment 5J, which are our charts that are aligned with the 2 agenda items. First, an update on our outreach efforts, and then secondly on our closed school efforts. The information that's provided is fiscal year to date, so you're looking at the activity, the type of event, event date, and location for everything that we've done externally, fiscal year to date. So we've done a total, participated in a total of 40 events to date, 29 of which have been on the informed choice or proactive outreach side, and then 11 closed school events. The item I think that I'd want to highlight First let me say, I don't believe we have any new members, so I won't go into a lot of detail about explaining exactly what we do on our proactive outreach events, but in broad strokes, we're talking college fairs, workshops, either that we put on ourselves or in conjunction with other partners, breakout sessions at events, meetings with key partners, town halls, regional events, et cetera. The content and focus comes from a very neutral perspective about prospective students' considerations, looking at higher education options, both including but not limited to for-profit post-secondary education. So we also talk about either directly or with our partners about community college, career education opportunities, apprenticeships, public education, nonprofit, et cetera. So that's kind of broad strokes. The one particularly exciting addition to the outreach schedule. A lot of the events are ongoing relationships that we've developed and have enhanced moving forward. One particular new one that we're really excited about is our partnership with the Region 10 Veteran Services Consortium in the Region 10 correlating with the greater San Diego region. It's a really close-knit consortium down there between community colleges, the UCs, the CSU, private colleges, the local county veteran service providers, and now, thankfully, us being invited to both come out and do some awareness of OSAR services, and now being invited to come back to do some more deeper dive into our content and the types of services we provide, both in a train-the-trainer type model and hopefully some individual opportunities to come out and speak with prospective students as well. So we're really excited about that. It's a geographic area that has been particularly hard hit by closures in that area. Also a robust area, obviously, just in terms of veteran families and military installations, et cetera. So we've got to really feel like we're getting closer connected to that world down there, and we're happy about that. Also evidenced by our first ever participation in the Camp Pendleton College Fair as well, which is the largest on-installation college fair that's put on by the actual educational liaisons on base. And we were happy to be a participant on that event in October as well. Another new one for us anyway was our partnership with the Hidden Genius initiative out of UC Berkeley, which is a program targeting and prioritizing African American males interested in careers and training in innovation and technology type positions, and also entrepreneurship. And that we've gone to one and look forward to going to future events with them as well. And then next up on the docket, things that are not on the list that are moving forward and we look forward to partnering in the future as well, is expanding our relationship, the existing relationship with CalVet in their CalTAP program, which has expanded its scope beyond just the military installations where we do a lot of our workshops onto community college campuses as well. And we're in close contact with their coordinator about looking for a role of OSAR in that expansion of that program, as well as expanding our relationship with the National Association of College Admission Counselors, or NACAC. That will be coming up in the spring, so I'll be able to report back on that at the next meeting. So any questions on our proactive outreach efforts?
Nice job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Moving on to closed schools, as I said, a smaller number, as I mentioned at the last meeting, I think it's an appropriate knock on wood. We have not had any major large impact closure since the Dream Center and Education Corporation of America schools went down early last year. We've had 11 closed school events to date, and I would say the largest one has been a technical, which was one where we did 2 workshops and it impacted about 125 students. But Again, nothing to the scope of Brightwood or Argosy to report on. We are taking advantage of and utilizing the time that would normally be dedicated to large closure outreach, given the fact that there have not been very many, to fine-tune our procedures, to do some internal cross-training on other divisions, on OSAR's services, so that they can help us in the future as needed. As been mentioned several times today, working with other divisions on monitoring at-risk schools that are demonstrating indicators that they could be at risk of closing moving forward, so that we are keyed up and ready to go as the outreach needs arise. Looking at off-site locations that make sense, building partnerships, again, with some entities locally, so that we've got backup plans for locations where we can hold events quickly as needed. And then our ongoing efforts to support the STRIF unit as well. I think Yvette is on the agenda after me and is going to show, we'll be reporting on some significant progress that's been made on the STRIF side, and OSAR has been supporting her unit as well in our role, assisting students with their STRIF claims. So that's kind of what we've been doing. The other thing, new thing I'd like to report, we've also rolled out for our last 2 closure events, our mass text messaging and mass voice messaging a system that we bought through a contract last year that allows us through the students' preferred means of communication, their cell phones, to push out information about upcoming outreach events through the provision of tiny URLs that will link to outreach-specific web pages and other resources that we can do both in the preparation for an upcoming event and then in follow-up with students post-event as well. We're really excited about that prospect. Again, it's been a good use of our time in these smaller closures to sort of get creative and roll out some test communication around that area, and it's been successful. And then the other thing we are preparing for, and I know this came up at the last advisory meeting as well, was at that time the forthcoming provisions of AB 1346 going into effect, which have subsequently done so on January 1st, which, among other things, expands students' eligibility for STRIF, former students of Corinthian schools, eligibility from STRIF. In the prior statute, there was a date established in 2014, which under AB 1346 gets pushed back 4 years to 2010. And we are staging and preparing for a pretty large-scale outreach campaign to make students aware of those changes in the statute and the fact that they may now be eligible for relief under STRIF under the new law. We're working closely with our Office of Public Affairs on a social media campaign, a dedicated website around 1346, and also setting up listservs to be able to push out, again, mass communication to the student contact information, which we do have, which I'm pretty excited about that also. We've got about 60,000 emails from former students from Corinthian colleges, many of which are in that new eligibility window that I just spoke of. And so we're trying to be very strategic in terms of being prepared to communicate that message clearly and concisely about their eligibility, to sort of strategize against that outreach campaign coming across as sort of spammy or unofficial when it is actually coming from a governmental agency. So we've got some strategies around that, and also measuring against the outgoing messages being quarantined. DCA's got some real good learning experiences in the past for masked email push-outs and have developed some strategies to avoid those getting put into quarantine so they actually do get to those recipients who can benefit from it. We'll also be doing press releases so that hopefully we'll be able to get out in front of local news media and print media and radio, wherever we can spread the message, we want to do that. But we also, again, want to be strategic about when to do it and how to do it, and to be prepared for, hopefully will be a windfall, I guess is the right word, a large increase in STRIF claims that would hopefully come in as a result of that. to try to affect what the legislative intent of that bill was. In addition to preparing for and making changes around other changes in 1346 that affect us operationally and Yvette's team in particular, about the review of strict claims under the new definition of economic loss, which has also been expanded to the benefit of students. So I know that was a lot. Without a whole lot going on the closed school side, hopefully we've been using good use of our time to be strategic around our outreach efforts, both scheduled and possibly unforeseen in the future. So, great. Any questions on closed school outreach?
I just have a question.
Sure.
It's not actually on that. It's just a follow-up on your large outreach campaign that you mentioned, and
Yes.
Whether or not you're working with partner organizations who serve students, and if your approach is to utilize some of their efforts. Obviously they're in touch with many of the students in your listserv, and what type of partnership you're doing with some of those organizations and the efforts that they have and the relationships, as well as their mediums that they have to push that information out as well.
Definitely, yeah. Thankfully, we've I believe, hopefully some are in the room, and hopefully they'll validate. We've been fostering some really good partnerships with the student advocacy community in general, even predating AB 1346 that we have talked about, and that as we sort of get our ducks in a row internally, we'll definitely be communicating with them more about how we can partner together. But the answer to that question is yes.
I'm sorry. Hey, Scott, Kevin Powers, real quick question for you. The mass communication system that was procured last year, is that like an Everbridge type system?
I'm not familiar with Everbridge, but it's a platform that allows you to do, I can't remember the number offhand. I know the person behind me knows. I think it's like 50,000 per year, where we can put out one message and then it pings all the numbers that we have, cell phone numbers that we have, and then you can customize it so that it's staged, so that it's the first level has information that you pre-populate, and then if the student clicks on that link, then the second message would be the actual tiny URL so that they can fire it up from their phone. Voicemail, it's configurable as well, so that if it how it's treated, if the phone's not answered, et cetera. And then the contract is limited on the number of numbers per year that we actually push out to. But it's very, like I said, it's very customizable. We haven't really taken it to scale yet, in terms of its full capacity. But we've done quite a bit of testing, and it's been successful. I think the last event, although small, it was a very high percentage of the names that we had on the student roster actually came to our workshop, and we partly attribute it to that.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, Everbridge is the system that lots of counties and military organizations and stuff use that as a means of getting information out to folks. Exactly, and emergencies, being able to respond to polls, to see availability and things. It's a great system. That's an awesome.
Sounds like very similar functionality.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi, Scott. I just have a couple of questions.
Sure.
First, great that you're reaching out to veterans. I think that's so important, and they're an underrepresented community and greatly impacted. So I'm really glad to see that, and also great that you're going to do this significant outreach to the Corinthian students. So one of my questions is, if you can't give an exact date, do you have a sense of when that campaign will be, effective? And
yeah, I can say that we're very, very close with crossing all of the T's and dotting all the I's that we can control internally. It is. There are two pretty key partners involved in terms of OIS, in terms of the technology to do it, and OPA, Office of Public Affairs, in terms of helping us with incorporating our feedback on some of the mocks that they've done, and just and some basic strategy as well, in terms of how and when to do that, as well as the comment about coordinating with the community as well. So I would say, within 30 days, I think we'll have everything covered on our end, and then it will be shortly thereafter. I'd be very happy to report on it at the next meeting, I think would be a very realistic expectation.
I look forward to hearing more about it when it happens.
And it's also worth saying this is a second phase that we initially received a set of data from the Attorney General's office through negotiation around an information sharing agreement, and did a push out about a year ago just in terms of OSAR's existence and awareness. This is going to a larger scale, and there's a little bit more depth in terms of the content that's coming out behind it. But we've got some lessons learned out of that as well. So, I think relative to the date of the statute going into effect, we're in pretty good shape.
That's great. And I know we're coming up on our 12:30 time, so I just want to add this question, even though you haven't talked about pending STRIF claims yet, because I think I know what the answer is. I mean, I'm looking at staffing, and I feel like you need more. I'm just going to be honest. I mean, you have 3 people, it looks like, who can conduct these outreach events. You have two people, one of which is vacant, to review STRIF claims. I mean, I know you don't, I got a sense from a former, earlier comment that you don't want to speak directly to that, but I feel like without more staff, it's going to be hard for you to do everything that you're already doing. Add on to, you're going to get 16,000 emails to people who can submit STRIF claims, and then in addition, when you have the next big closure, what happens then? Yeah. I see a concern there.
So thank you for saying that, and I think it's been a team effort. So you see the 3 people within the org chart, but what you don't know is that chiefs have been helping out in this process and doing everything we can behind the scenes to make sure that we are supporting the students in the best way we can. And so thank you for making that note.
Well, I see that you're doing really great work. I mean, the pending applications have gone down. I see that. I see all this outreach. Yep. I'm just saying, for those of us who are out there talking about what needs to happen, maybe you won't say, yes, Natalie, this is what needs to happen, but I think this needs to happen. There needs to be more staff. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
And just to make sure the record got it straight as well, I thought I heard you say 16, but it was actually 60,000. Yeah, so it even takes it to another level. But yes. I hear you.
Any other questions for Scott? Thank you, sir.
I appreciate it.
All right. So it's 12:25. What shall we do? How should we have Lisa and Yvette do theirs and then break and do the 2 hours, or how do you? Because I know you guys have people planned to be there at 12:30, and I don't want to screw everything up.
Well, part 6 is just an update, so that's only going to take a few minutes. I'm just giving you all an update on kind of where those things are. And so depending on how this next part goes, we might be able to get out of here. So I'll leave that up to the committee.
So before you guys start, sorry, Margaret, do you need a minute? I mean, we can take a 2-minute break and then come back and finish and then just be done? Okay. Do you guys mind waiting 2 minutes so we can have a quick bio break? And then, yes, time it.
The timer's on.
All right. 2-minute break. Thank you, everyone, for your speedy break and return. We are on our second to last item, which is the STRIF report. And at the table, we have Yvette and Lisa. And take it away, ladies.
All right.
And thank you for humoring us for our 2-minute break.
No problem. Good afternoon, Yvette Johnson. I'm the administration chief. And in your packets today, you've been provided the statistics for the Student Issue and Recovery Fund claims that we've received over the past fiscal year. So what we did this time is we did a breakdown to show you from the last time we reported at the advisory committee meeting to the progress that has been made to this point. So some of the things that I'd like to point out are that we have paid out, to date, we've paid out 197 STRIF claims. And since the last time we reported this information, we've paid out over $1 million in those claims. So starting from the beginning, if you look from the last time we reported, we had 63 claims that were paid back in November of 2019. We're now paid out 197. We have claims that were deemed ineligible as well as we've been able to close 74 claims to date for students that we were unable to contact. And those claims are only closed after we've made attempts to contact the student. We have a 30, 60, 90-day schedule for where we try to contact the students. If they don't respond to us, then we will close out those claims.
Yvette, are these numbers? I'm sorry, Michael. Do you have a
But I think it's also important to add is if a student does contact us after the 90 days, we will work with that student, obviously, in the process. So
Right, they can reopen the claim at any time.
And so I was just going to ask about the difference between 63 and 197. Does that 197 include the 63, or is that 197 since 11/8?
That's inclusive, so it's
Okay.
a total up to this fiscal year.
Got it.
Throughout
Thank
this
you.
fiscal year.
I want to add just one more thing too on the 30, 60, 90s is that we do look at every way of contacting the students, phone, email, snail mail, and even looking at LexisNexis to try to locate the students before we close them out.
So right now we have 230 claims pending. They're actually, I'm sorry, they're in our queue, and that means that they have not been touched or assigned to an analyst yet to work, but that's down from 562 in November. In our total claim universe, we have 1,097 claims, which is down from 1,454 from November. So a lot of this is due in part to all of the collaboration with OSAR. You know, all of our work comes from the OSAR unit. When they go out and they do their outreach, based off of that, we receive the claims. And it's been great to collaborate with them and to get their assistance. So they help the students put their claims together with all the information. And by the time it gets to our desk to process, we're not having to try to piece things together. So that's been very, very helpful.
And once again, I don't want to. I think it's important for the advisory committee to understand that a lot of this is based on the outreach that OSAR is doing. They've been doing a phenomenal job. Obviously, I've been here for 2 years now as the Bureau, and they came on right around that same time. And the outreach is why you see these numbers starting to rise, because students are starting to learn more about OSAR, and I think that's a plus. And I hope I didn't steal your thunder, Yvette. Sorry. Yvette may say it again.
So if you look at the bottom of page 71, you'll see the current fund balance for the Student Tuition Recovery Fund is $24 million. And as you can see, over the years, there's been a steady decrease in the amount of the actual fund. And those are based off of the claims that have been paid out.
And when it gets to 20, that's when we start collecting again, right?
Correct. So if you look at page 72, in prior meetings, the committee had asked for a breakdown of the large impact closures. So this has been provided for you. So based on the large impact closures, you'll see that from the start of the closures to current, we paid out over $2 million just for the large impact schools. And that's inclusive of ITT, Heald, the Corinthian schools, Argosy, Brightwood. Any questions on that one?
In terms of scale, Brightwood would be similar to Everest, and there's obviously threefold or twice the lifetime payout so far. Would you attribute that to OSAR as well, just the recency of Brightwood?
Yes, definitely, with the outreach.
Got it. Thank you.
So
and with the new Corinthians outreach, we expect to be able to bring up the Everest number.
Yes.
Got it.
So if you look at page 73, I believe it was Margaret that asked at the last meeting that we provide a breakdown of the STRIF claims received per fiscal year. So this is a breakdown which shows you in 15-16 all the way through current, the claims that have been received. So if you look at 15-16, you'll see that there was an increase starting in January, and that, of course, is due to the Corinthian and Maranello closures. If you look at 16-17, it was a continuation of the Maranello closures and the ITT closures. In 18-19, it was the Corinthian outreach conducted by OSAR, as well as Brightwood, the Art Institute, and Argosy. And that's what took our numbers up. Any
So,
questions?
I'm sorry, just to do a comparison shop here.
Mhm.
So the 3,264 total is the total claims you've gotten since the 2015 fiscal year started, right?
Correct.
And then on the chart on page 71, where you have the total number of claims, 1,097, is that just claims since the 1920?
It would be more so since the, it actually it's the 15-16 as well because it starts with the Corinthian and Maranello closures.
Wait, what?
So the 1097 they're still outstanding out of the 3,264?
Correct.
Got it, okay. Thank you. Sorry, from this chart, I thought you were saying you'd only ever had 1,454 claims, but that was just for the.
No, and then this
time
chart
period.
is, remember, is just for the large closures. So
Okay.
it doesn't include any of the other schools that we might have
Gotcha.
gone through closures on.
Okay, thank you.
And as Kate mentioned, the last part of the chart shows the student tuition recovery fund age pending, and to date, we have 1,097 claims pending.
Can you give me a sense of, I know it won't be precise, but how long it takes to, once all the evidence is, once you have all the evidence on an application and it's complete, how long it takes for a staff person to review it and make a decision?
Well, it all depends on their workload, and I would say, what about a week or so? I would say, yeah, probably about 30 days going through the whole process.
Okay, and am I right in assuming, looking at the org chart, that right now you have one person who's doing this?
I have two. I have one associate governmental program analyst and one staff services analyst.
Okay.
But we have one vacancy that we're currently recruiting for.
Okay.
And we have a little task force of some staff from another unit that are helping us part-time.
Okay.
Yep. And then also, I think it's important to know, of the 1,097, 439 of those are awaiting student responses.
Mm-hmm.
Real quickly, I'd like to commend Lisa and Dr. Marian on that shifting of resources, which I alluded to earlier across the org chart, like being able to borrow from, Rob Peter to pay Paul on it for the short term is a great idea.
But I think it's also important to know that when I'm taking one staff
away
from
from
another
something else,
area,
yeah.
like I'm moving pieces right now.
Yeah,
and we
sure.
can only, I think I said at the last meeting, all it takes is the perfect storm and we could be have an issue.
Natalie, I want to respond a little bit more to your question about how much time it takes. We advised about 30 days for the staff unit to go through the process of getting approved and so forth. And then if it goes out for payment, it could be anywhere 30, 60, 90 days from the state controller's office.
That's helpful. And do they receive the decision after? Do they receive notice of a decision before the relief, or what is that process?
Correct. Once we've made a determination, when we send the information over to the state controller's office, we also send a letter to the student letting them know that it's been sent to the state controller's office and for how much.
Great.
All right, any other questions?
I have a quick question. I don't know if maybe I missed it if Scott covered this, but do you have an idea of what the impact of his campaign to reach out to more Corinthian students is going to be on the STRIF account?
Go ahead.
So I think will have a huge increase, right? Because we're reaching out to students from 2010, right? And I think no question that there's going to be a lot more students that will start to come into this in the queue in regards to the process. So no question about that. It will rise.
Except that it's going to be very difficult to locate students from that far back because of people are so mobile.
Yeah, potentially. Absolutely.
So it'll be questionable how many you can actually reach.
Right, and it'll probably take more effort as well because going back that far, the students still maintaining their information.
Even the ones that you do reach, there's also the potential that they already got a closed school discharge through the Department of Ed, and so what they might be eligible for doesn't mean that there won't still be a bunch of work for OSAR and STRIF to go through to figure out whether or not that's the case. But I think in the time period since 2010, a lot of those students have probably already kind of gone down other roads for getting some resolution on it. So, but it's definitely gonna be a lot of work, no doubt about it. All right, Natalie, you have another one?
Sorry, I know we're up on the clock. The reason why I brought up the sunset recommendations on record retention, one of the recommendations is to use STRIF. And I just want to say, and I don't know if you can speak to this, we don't really know right now from the data I've seen how much of that 25 million could be used towards applications, because we haven't yet reached the peak of applications that are eligible, right? I mean, just talking about that email that's going to go out to 16,000 email addresses. And so I have concern because the statute says it's for relieving economic loss of students who have suffered. And that's kind of why I wanted to get into what the needs are for record retention, because maybe there's another avenue for that money. And I'm just putting that out there. Okay.
All right. It is out there. All right, thank you both very much. All right, we're getting to the end of the line here. Any public comment on the STRIF or OSAR activities before we move on? Mr. Johnson? Nope. Usually I can see the light come on.
Robert Johnson, California Association of Private Secondary Schools.
Hello. All right. God, that was difficult. I think I'll take a nap. Robert Johnson, California Association of Private Post-Secondary Schools. One of the things that's missing in the calculations on this in terms of school closures, and this goes back quite a ways, are the numbers of students who basically go to other private post-secondary schools and finish up their education and training. Just recently, I think with the last closures for Brightwood, the nursing program students were literally, I think, almost 100% enrolled in Concord or Pima or Success Education. And I think almost entirely all of them have, including San Joaquin Valley, I believe as well, have graduated and are now pursuing their nursing career. So inside of a perfect closed school scenario, there would be a role for the state to manage this process and report on it. And part one of the management of the process is to continue to identify what institutions could take the transfers of those credits from those students who don't want to start over again, get a STRIF application, refund, and start all over again, but they make the choice to transfer their units to an institution that would take that and allow them to finish that out. Now, in regards to what happened, for example, with the Brightwood schools, I will tell you most of the receiving institutions took the students for free. There was no T4 eligibility left for those students. The schools assumed those costs and went ahead and graduated those students out. I think that's always going to be the situation, but that might be maybe the right situation. And there should be an ability at the state level for the Bureau to step in and provide funding from some fund for either student assistance with tuition or additional instructional staff or retention of instructional staff who are currently teaching those students, even paying rent to landlords to keep the buildings open so you don't have to find a new place to send students. A number of items that would truly be cutting edge. There's nobody thinking on that level in this country at this point. But it makes perfect sense when you look at how school closures have operated in reality over the last 10 to 15 years. It's just not talked about. So one of the things that basically, and I will tell you that, and one of the reasons not, because one side doesn't want to reward a school that is closed but they want to help the students that want to keep their education going. So they can't have it both ways. So often you just pick a side, and you get a lot of folks on let's not reward the school. Remember, the school's closed. So that shouldn't be the issue. The issue should be basically how do we finish off those students who wish to stay and complete their education and go on to the career they've chosen. So I would suggest that maybe OSARs or somebody can go back and take a look at just a selected group, and I would start with Brightwood because it's the most recent large closer, I believe. I don't think there's many left to close on a large level, but I think Brightwood was one of those, and see how many of those students basically did transfer to other institutions, and they may have transferred to public institutions as well. There's no saying that they basically all stayed in the private for-profit world. So it would be good to know that for two reasons. One, it's a positive. It's a positive for higher education in California. I think that's something we should be proud of. Secondly, it has cost influence. It has a cost bearing on whether or not those X numbers of students are being calculated in STRIF calculations as to whether or not they're going to draw down that $25 million, or are they outside that fund? And so you can reserve those dollars for other folks who have not gone through that same experience. So there's some merit and logic to looking at this kind of approach. School closures are never happy, but basically often they're planned, and often basically it's done through merger as well as just flat out closure. And if there are students that are impacted by those situations, there should be a plan in there basically that says, hey, we can kind of take a look at your situation and figure out a way to help you. And it appears to be you have the ability to do that almost on an individual basis now, given your improvements in your OSARS unit and your STRIF units. They appear to be operating at a much more sophisticated level than what I've seen in the last years, last 5 or 10 years. So I think for the first time, this becomes plausible to do that. So just some thoughts on that.
Thank you.
So make sure that we have that on record. It was a compliment inside of that statement.
We'll take it.
All right, so the last piece is going to be pretty quick. So just a couple updates I have. So I'm sorry, did we have any more public comments?
Any other public comments before?
Okay, cool. All right. So if you look at the Bppe at a glance sheet that I had handed out to you all, it's a section at the bottom that says legislative impact. We talked about AB 1346 already, so I'm not going to spend any time on that, but it's going up to as far as AB 1340, just an update on that. So this is the one that requires private post-secondary educational institutions approved by the Bureau to collect and retain individual identifying information for each graduate that completes a program at an institution on or after January 1st, 2020. And this could be enrollment information, loan data information. For everybody that knows, this is the conversation that we're having with EDD in regards to data. This does tie into our IT system. And so the director has the authority to be able to give us approval when she feels that we're all in a good place IT-wise to be able to move forward with this bill. I think it's important to know also that a lot of people throughout the state are involved with the Cradle to Career that's being pushed out of the governor's office. And so we are a part of that discussion too. And so as we get closer to getting our RT system complete, I'll come back and give some additional information on that. Moving on to AB 1344. This is the bill that increases the Bureau's oversight authority for out-of-state private post-secondary institutions. This bill will require some amendments to the current registration requirements for out-of-state institutions. And that's where we are with that one. So give you an update on that. And
with that one, we have a year before it becomes
correct.
effective, right?
So July 1, 2021, 2022, we have so we have time with that one. And then the last one, as I said, we already hit on 1346, is just a reminder that we have our sunset hearing coming up, likely in March. And so that's the big legislative impact that we have going on currently. As far as an update, moving on to B, which is the English language programs. At this point, it's at hearing, and it's been there from December 3rd, 2019. And so as we get more information, I'll continue to provide you an update on that. Moving on to C, verification for exempt status. That's currently with agency, and it's been with agency since April 3rd, 2019. And then moving on to D, which is this is just to comply, to fill in some of the loopholes for compliance with the minimum operating standards, and that's been with the department since March of last year. And then the last one on here, which is E, student records and maintenance, is currently in the process in-house within Bppe. And that concludes my report.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
When you say it's with the department, that means we're going to DCA for review.
Correct.
What does it mean when it says agency?
So that's, so you have DCA, then you have agency, so.
The parent
Exactly.
agency, so
Exactly.
it goes there
Yes.
before it goes even to the
Yep.
Office of Administrative Law.
Correct.
And so do we have any information about the big holdup on the ESL?
This is the most information I have at this point.
We should have had this before when we had the director here.
No comment.
Well, she might have more info, right?
So that concludes
Grill
my
her
report.
about that at the next meeting. And just as a quick question, Mike, I don't know if you know if that, but E, the student records and maintenance of records, is about the custodian of records and
Correct.
what happens with the records at a school closure, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's one that's getting into the pipeline now.
And just to give everybody a quick update, actually our ledge person for our, everybody remembers Kent. Kent has left and moved on to bigger and better things. And so that position is vacant. And so we're hoping to fill it really soon.
I'm sorry I know we're ready to be done. But what are you looking at with student records and maintenance? Is there a reason you're looking at it?
Yeah, it's just basically cleanup language.
Okay.
It's not anything extensive.
Okay.
I just raised it because I remembered we talked about it, Natalie, and I was trying to remember if that's what it was about.
Yeah.
I think it was probably the last meeting before you started. We had discussed
Got
that
it.
one, but it'll come back around, so we'll see it again. Okay. Any other comments on the regulation update?
Can I make a comment, Kate?
You may.
They asked earlier, the statute, what was this on? Our statutes for complaint prioritization is California Education Code 94941, and the regulation is 75300. I don't know if anybody else wanted that.
Thank you, Doug. 75,300.
75300.
I'd like to just quickly go on record to commend Dr. Marian and Lisa and all of the staff. The caliber of the reporting through the department reports is really exceptional and shows amazing growth over the last 2 years in terms of the level of information with your limited resources that you're already providing to us, to the board here, is much better. And so we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yes, we appreciate the responsiveness to our endless requests for additional information. So thank you for that. And we know that it takes a lot of manual digging to come up with a lot of this stuff, so we appreciate you guys doing that. So thank you very much. Okay, any future agenda items before we adjourn?
The sunset review process, the strategic planning, maybe that's a way for us to be involved in addition to just the surveys. And any Bureau input that's being given regarding possible legislation this year or possible actual positions, although I doubt that's going to be available. But
And I hate to do this, but I feel like we need to talk about income share agreements. I gave you a year, and it's back. I'm seeing it bubbling up a lot. I'm seeing a lot of traditional schools that are already Bureau approved who are asking me about using them, and I feel like we need to have guidance one way or the other. So I would like to talk about that a little more. Any other future agenda items for the good of the order? All right. Party on, Wayne. Do we, Doug or Noreen, do we need an adjournment vote, or can we just adjourn? Okay, everyone want to adjourn? Say aye.
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 All right, adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and thank you all for staying on calendar so we could go party at the Bureau's new digs.